Epic Universe is one of the most significant cultural developments in the history of American entertainment. And no, this is not an exaggeration, but for some reason people outside of theme park circles really don't see it like that. It's a park that's poised to completely upset the balance of power in the world of theme parks, an industry valued at $35.5 billion per year in the United States. Theme parks are cornerstones of American leisure. Particularly Disney has become a cultural mecca, which every American is expected to have experienced at least once in their lifetime. But that cornerstone is currently being disrupted by what Universal opened in May of 2025. In the same way that GTA 6 is going to completely disrupt the video game space next year, Epic Universe is doing the same thing to the theme park industry. And while there will be hundreds and hundreds of video essays analyzing GTA 6, theme parks don't get the same level of scrutiny here on YouTube. And covering that disparity is the whole point of this video. The landscape of themed entertainment, and by extension American leisure, is changing, and the story of what's happening here is worth hearing. To witness the beginning of this new era, I traveled to Orlando to see Epic Universe's grand opening on May 22nd, 2025. This video is going to be part travel vlog covering that day, part history lesson for what this opening means to the larger world of theme parks, and part granular analysis of every ride and show at the park. I have a lot to say about Epic Universe and everything that happened on that day, but before I get into that, I think it's important to have some context. It's super important to run through a really quick history of the beef between Disney and Universal, because an understanding of that is critical to understanding what Universal is trying to do with this new theme park. If you're already well versed in theme park history, or maybe just don't care, feel free to use the timestamps I included down in the description to skip to what interests you. But if you're not familiar, I do encourage watching this because it's a really interesting story that informs Epic's entire mission statement. On July 17th, 1955, Walt Disney essentially invented themed entertainment as an art form with the opening of Disneyland. Amusement attractions existed well before this, but Disneyland was the first park to open with such attention to art and detail. A big reason for this was because the Walt Disney Company took so many of the artists who worked on their movies and threw them onto the Disneyland project. They used movie-making techniques to create the park. This is probably the main ingredient in what made Disneyland truly special and something never before seen.
To all who come to this happy place, welcome.
Disney enjoyed uncontested dominance over the theme park industry in North America throughout the next few decades, but a shift was created when Universal opened Universal Orlando on June 7th, 1990.
Congratulations, everybody, and we're really happy to be here in Florida, and we'll be here forever. Thank you.
Universal Hollywood had existed as a theme park since opening their signature tram tour in 1964, and in a similar vein to Disneyland, used their movie-making prowess to create immersive themed spaces. The Universal Hollywood Tram Tour became a staple attraction for tourists visiting SoCal. Universal Orlando was an attempt to stake their claim on the East Coast.
$630 million complex is not only the largest working motion picture studio outside of Hollywood, but like its counterpart in Los Angeles, features rides and attractions based on Universal films like Jaws, King Kong, and E.T.
Universal Orlando opened with many of the same attractions found in Hollywood, but was quickly evolving into a full-on resort that threatened the success that Walt Disney World had been seeing in the region since 1971. In the midst of all of this, then Disney CEO Michael Eisner saw the success of Universal Hollywood and lifted its park concept for the opening of Disney World's third theme park, MGM Studios, which opened in 1989.
This combination working studio and entertainment attraction is the first of its kind built in Florida and will offer visitors a behind-the-screen look at the process of movie making.
This is important to point out because many Disney homers will swear that Disney has never seen Universal as direct competition or any type of threat, but obviously they thought enough of them to undercut them as early as the 1980s. And then in 1999, Universal Orlando expanded to open City Walk and Islands of Adventure, solidifying themselves as a must-see diversion on a family's 7-day Walt Disney World vacation.
There's a whole new universe out there, and Orlando will never be the same. Welcome to Universal Orlando, a spectacular vacation of theme parks, entertainment, recreation, dining, and shopping for the entire family.
Islands of Adventure also marked an important shift on how the two companies designed their parks. Now, this is a sore subject when talking to theme park nerds such as myself, but back in the day, theme parks were called theme parks because they had unifying themes, thus the name theme park. Epcot was about humanity's progress and celebrating our cultural differences. Animal Kingdom was about our relationship with nature and our responsibility to protect our environment. MGM Studios and Universal Studios were about the art of making movies. The concept of Islands of Adventure was taking various intellectual properties like Jurassic Park, Marvel, and Dr. Seuss and bringing them to life. There was no one central unifying message behind IOA, it was just a collection of interesting IPs with worlds that people wanted to be immersed in. That is, with the exception of one world, the Lost Continent, a land that Universal Creative got to pour their creative juices into without having to adhere to the constraints of an established brand. But ironically, in a cruel Shakespearean twist of fate, this land would one day create the death of the quote theme park as we know it. The Lost Continent was themed around Western, Arab, and Mediterranean myth and adventure. Some key attractions over the years were the Voyage of Sinbad, a stage show whose theater still sits abandoned in the park today, Poseidon's Fury, a walkthrough attraction which also still sits abandoned in the park today, and the Dueling Dragons roller coaster, which has been completely dismantled. Because of the park's location as well as its layout being a circle surrounding a lagoon, it made expansion very difficult, and if IOA was going to add new experiences, they would have to replace some old ones. And due to various factors, it became clear that if there was a land that was going to start to get cut, it was going to have to be the Lost Continent. The only question is, what would replace it?
Coming this spring, you can truly be part of Harry Potter's world, where magic becomes real and excitement awaits at every turn.
On June 18th, 2010, Universal replaced the upper half of the Lost Continent with Harry Potter and the Forbidden Journey in Hogsmeade. It cannot be overstated how monumental this opening was for the theme park industry. It was really one of those tentpole moments in the industry where everything changed, and I think the only thing that could be comparable might be the creation of Disneyland in 1955. There were a number of reasons for this. The first was the choice of IP. Harry Potter was one of those franchises that didn't have any kind of IRL presence in the United States, so millions of fans were clamoring for some way to be able to be in this space they'd only seen or read about. None of the other IPs at IOA had the gravity that Harry Potter had, and so finally Universal had a draw that could compete with the beloved films that Walt Disney World was able to base their rides on. Ironically, Harry Potter Land was first pitched to Disney. While I don't think it would have ever gotten built, it is fun to think about what would have been. The other thing that made Harry Potter so monumental was the execution. Harry Potter and the Forbidden Journey has this really dynamic ride system which helps tell a story that brings to life a large swath of the Harry Potter universe in a short amount of time. It also sported a queue, which some might say is better than the attraction itself, which also brought iconic locations from the movie to life in size and scale. Hogsmeade let guests geek out by buying wands and cloaks, and if you were a lifelong Potter fan, it was just a space that you wanted to be in. The lessons that the themed entertainment industry learned from Harry Potter were clear. If you invest in great execution, people will reward you with attendance, post it online, tell other people how much fun they had, and create buzz. And that the way you draw people is not with thoughtful, original ride concepts, but by creating attractions based on IPs that people love. Universal further solidified their dominance by creating a Diagon Alley in Universal Studios Park next door in 2014, and created the Hogwarts Express, unifying the two parks like never before. Geniusly, guests would need to have a park hopper to experience this attraction, since it literally took you to the second park, and suddenly, for all the visiting Harry Potter fans, buying that extra park hopper became mandatory. Now, flashback to Disney during that time, I really don't think they had any sort of response to what was happening at Universal, whether through pure hubris or ignorance. To Disney, Universal was always going to be the little brother. The Disney brand was just too strong to be threatened. Plus, guests needed at least 4 days to experience the 4 main theme parks at Walt Disney World, so it made the most sense for guests coming on a 7-day trip to stay at Disney and go to Universal as a side venture. Universal recognized this and would often give guests steep discounts if they purchased tickets for more than 2 days. Deals from Universal like buy 3 days, get 2 free were common as a way to pull guests away from the Disney bubble. So from Disney's point of view, if guests stayed on property and ventured over to Universal for a couple days, a majority of their money was going to the mouse anyway, so why worry? Well, in reality during that time, Disney World was stagnant following the departure of CEO Michael Eisner a few years prior, at least in my opinion. There aren't really a lot of words that you can use to describe Walt Disney World during this time period in the 2010s. It was just kind of bland. Probably the biggest deal was the expansion of New Fantasyland and Magic Kingdom in 2012, which was exciting at the time, but I think has aged pretty poorly in retrospective. Their next major expansion wasn't until 2017 with Pandora: The World of Avatar, and yeah, obviously the Avatar brand can't compete at all with that of Harry Potter. While Pandora was well executed, most people either weren't familiar with the Avatar IP or looked at it cynically. Pandora was just not a world that people were clamoring to experience like Harry Potter, not even close. But eventually, Disney did create what most consider to be the first real response to Harry Potter in 2019, with the opening of Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, nearly a decade after Hogsmeade opened at Islands of Adventure. Star Wars was one of the only IPs out there that could go toe-to-toe with Harry Potter, and was a space that fans wanted to explore just as badly. While a thorough examination of Galaxy's Edge is a subject for a whole other video, I think most people would agree that it did not execute to the same level of Harry Potter at Universal. There were a few reasons for this that I'll run through briefly. 1. Betting on the future by placing the time period of the land during the sequel trilogy, which most people had not formed an emotional attachment to yet. 2. Building a land based on a brand new planet guests didn't know about, rather than an established location people had a desire to explore. And 3. Stunting guests role-playing by at least initially prohibiting guests from wearing the Jedi cloaks and swinging the $200 lightsabers they sold due to Disney's character integrity policy. Imagineering has this philosophy of giving guests the experience they didn't know that they wanted instead of the experience that they're asking for. Sometimes this pays off big, but other times you need to dumb things down, just give the people what they want. I think this is the biggest difference philosophically between Galaxy's Edge and the Wizarding World of Harry Potter. So by the time Disney opened their response to Harry Potter, the Wizarding World had ballooned into this untamable beast that Disney didn't take seriously until it was too late. By this point, seeing, quote, Harry Potter World became an essential part of going to the theme parks in Florida, so much so that guests would often go to Disney, assuming that they would find Hogwarts there. There was also a very clear adversarial relationship between Disney and Universal at this time, if there hadn't already been one for decades prior. The first thing that comes to mind was when Bob Chapek, aka Disney's former CEO, aka Satan, criticized the 10-hour lines at the opening of Hagrid's Motorbike Adventure coaster at Islands of Adventure. His argument was that long lines were a sign of failure of park operations rather than a sign of popularity. While there is some truth to that statement, his argument was very convenient given that Galaxy's Edge was relatively dead at the time, and all anyone was talking about was how insanely in demand Hagrid's was. The other element of this rivalry that I don't think gets enough attention is the anti-consumerism of the Bob Chapek era and how it alienated so many Disney superfans at that time. During the COVID pandemic, theme parks were one of the most obvious things to restrict, as you have tens of thousands of people, often packed in enclosed spaces, all touching the same things like ride vehicles and dining tables all day long. The Disney parks were something that seemed like they would always be there, and when people didn't have access to them all of a sudden, fans realized that these special places could one day be taken away, and they developed a deep appreciation for the parks that they didn't have before. The reopenings of Disney World and Disneyland signaled to the American public that the end of the pandemic was on the horizon. Fans were elated they could return to the parks, albeit with a modified experience, because the parks opening meant a return to normalcy, and on a subconscious level, every Disney fan came back with an understanding of how culturally important these places were. In my opinion, Disney executives like Chapek recognized this and made sure to take full advantage of this goodwill as the park started opening back up. The message that was sent to Disney regulars like myself was clear. You are lucky to have these parks, and as a result, we are going to make the park experience as difficult and expensive as we can get away with, and if you don't like it, don't come. They did this by, 1, creating a prohibitive reservation system in the guise of protecting the guest experience, while in reality, its only purpose was to give Disney the exact number of how many people would be in their park on a given day to maximize their yields. While this system was in place, you could have bought a ticket to Disney, but that didn't mean you could go in. If you didn't also have a reservation for the date that you bought the ticket for, and the reservations were filled up for that day, then you could not go. And there are plenty of horror stories online of cast members who had guests that traveled to Disney, bought tickets for a day, didn't get a reservation, and were told they couldn't go in and their tickets were useless. This reservation system is for the most part dead now, but it stuck along way longer than it should have. Number 2, taking away free Fast Pass and replacing it with a paid option. To Disney's credit, they're probably the last and maybe only park to offer free Fast Pass, but this change only created more negativity in guest perception. You could easily argue that the parks would be better without any Fast Pass at all, but I don't think anyone would argue that paid Fast Pass is better than free Fast Pass. Number 3, taking away the Magical Express, the free shuttle that used to take guests from the Orlando airport to their hotels free of charge. Chapek said this was done because people have more ways than ever to get around with apps like Uber, but obviously those aren't free, so that's a pretty big difference. And apart from just being convenient and fun, the Magical Express was a huge relief for families with special needs or just kids, since they were much more accommodating than just a standard bus or cab might be. Again, purely a cost-cutting measure with no benefit to the guest. Number 4, Disney also took away free parking at their hotels for a time. This also was eventually brought back, but just think back to that time. Not only did you have to get a rental car to get from Orlando Airport to Disney potentially, but then you would have to pay to park the damn thing. There's probably other things that I'm forgetting too, but essentially Disney was just communicating that they're willing to make the park experience as difficult as possible as they can get away with, and that guests were lucky to be able to go there. Now juxtapose this arrogance with this other resort called Universal that offers tons of discounts and deals, considerably cheaper hotels, and just the vibe that you are a guest, and as a guest they want to do the best job they can to earn your business. And not to mention all the other experiences Universal had been adding since the IOA City Walk expansion in 1999. During this time, throughout the 2010s, Universal was still expanding with a bunch of on-property hotels and the opening of Volcano Bay a few years prior in 2017. Universal calls Volcano Bay their third theme park. While Volcano Bay is beautiful and well made, people just do not consider water parks in the same vein as theme parks. By that logic, Disney World has 6 theme parks, but you'll never hear Disney or any guests claim this. But this is all to say that Universal was on the precipice of having its own fully fledged resort, one that you could not devote 2 days to as an afterthought, but one that you needed to dedicate an entire vacation towards to see everything. The only thing that it was missing was one true third theme park, which takes us back to the subject of this video, Epic Universe. Epic Universe, among other things, represents the breakthrough Universal had been clamoring for decades that would transform them into that week-long destination. This is evident by the language that a lot of the executives use when describing Epic in various promos and interviews.
This really changes everything for us. It changes our position in the marketplace.
But for us, Universal Epic Universe is a huge game changer because we are adding Epic, this Epic experience, onto everything that we already offer in Orlando. And there is just not enough time to see everything at Universal Orlando Resort in 1 week. I'm just going to tell you that. You're going to run out of time.
This gives us the opportunity to bring people to Universal Orlando for an entire week of the most incredible experiences they can imagine.
So given the direction of the theme park industry at this time, whenever Epic was announced, the obvious question was, what are the IPs going to be? Another Harry Potter expansion was a given. What part of the Harry Potter universe would Universal want to bring to life? It was heavily rumored and then confirmed that the Harry Potter expansion would be based on the Ministry of Magic, featured prominently in the latter Harry Potter films. Rumors of a Ministry of Magic expansion at Diagon Alley had swirled around for years since at least 2016, and never materialized, but this new park would allow Universal to finally bring this concept to life. There was also a rumor that the new land would be based on Fantastic Beasts, which is obviously a clash of timelines, so fans wanted to know how they would rectify that. The answer ended up being a combination of both, which we'll get into great detail later on in the video. So besides Harry Potter, what other IPs could compete with Disney? The greatest answer would not be in the realm of film or television, but in the untapped world of video games. Nintendo was a slam dunk partnership in the same vein as Harry Potter in 2010. The larger Nintendo universe gives a sense of excitement and nostalgia across all generations. It's a brand that everyone has had exposure to at least at some point in their life, and anyone who's played a Nintendo game before would be immediately interested in being in that space they could only see on a flat TV screen. When directly comparing brands, I would venture to say that between Mario, Zelda, and Donkey Kong, you could pit the larger Nintendo universe up against any Disney film in terms of popularity, and Nintendo would win. Besides Nintendo, Universal also tapped into one of their own film franchises, the How to Train Your Dragon series. While not as culturally ubiquitous as, say, Shrek, the How to Train Your Dragon movies are universally beloved by those who've seen them, and also commercially successful enough to spawn a TV series and a live-action movie. It also offers a visually unique world to bring to life, and plenty of potential experiences that help convey the heart and emotion of the films. And the final land would be based on an IP that not many people had asked for, but would still speak to generations of moviegoers, as well as be based on what Universal does better than anyone else, horror. A land based on Universal monsters would be an opportunity to capture the essence of what makes Universal's classic monster movies so awesome, and make them relevant again for a new generation. It would also allow Universal to have a horror presence in their parks, not relegated to a stage show, not for a seasonal event every year, but in a permanent place for horror lovers. Besides the 4 main lands, this park would also offer other flourishes like a beautiful central hub connecting each land, and an on-site hotel with a dedicated entrance to the park. With the creation of Epic, the little brother would not be little anymore, And finally, travelers were going to be forced to choose between Disney and Universal on a standard week-long vacation. Would they choose Walt Disney World with its world-class pedigree and rides based on its century-old catalog? Or would they go to Universal with Harry Potter World, Minions, and Nintendo? Forcing this decision was one of the key strategic objectives with Epic Universe's opening, and it's going to be key to evaluating its success years down the line. So now, after that abridged history, you're caught up with the background of what the opening of Epic Universe means to Orlando and the global theme park community. So let's finally talk about the subject of this video, Epic Universe and its opening. What happened on that day? Did it deliver on its promise, and will it put Disney on their heels? So here's the part where I talk about my trip to Epic Universe, where we spent 5 days at Walt Disney World and 3 days at Universal, with the prime objective being to see Epic Universe on opening day. At this point, I should probably also explain the process for buying tickets to opening day, as well as the months following its opening. Seemingly to help curb demand, Universal would only allow you to buy tickets to Epic Universe if you bought them as part of a package of 3 or more days. The catch being, only one of those days of the package you could actually go to Epic Universe. We were fine getting that 3-day package because we'd already planned on going to Universal for at least 3 days anyway, but I was very anxious about the idea of only being able to be at Epic for 1 day and jamming everything into an opening day that was probably going to be wall-to-wall packed. So I made sure that as soon as Express Passes went on sale, we bought them. I will say too that the process for buying tickets to Epic Universe was a fucking mess, because while the date the tickets were going to be sold was announced ahead of time, there was zero information on what time they would drop, if there'd be a queue, how reservations to Grand Helios would work, etc. For example, at the time these tickets dropped, Grand Helios' opening was the same date as the opening of Epic Universe, so how would that work? Would you have to devote some of your park day to checking into your hotel? What time would all of this happen? Could I go to Grand Helios to skip the line to get in? There was no elaboration, just what date these tickets were going on sale, and that was it. I woke up at about 5 a.m. on the day the tickets dropped. At that point, Grand Helios had already booked up for opening day, which sucked, but I was glad I at least got tickets. We ended up staying at the Sapphire Falls Hotel, which is a fine hotel, and in the end, it made more sense that way, considering if we could have gotten Grand Helios, it would be pretty dumb to book a 4-night stay in a hotel right next to a theme park that we could only access for 1 day. The process for buying Express Pass for opening day was similarly haphazard. One day I woke up in the morning, I looked at my phone and saw the notification that the Express Passes had dropped. So I immediately ran out of bed, grabbed my wallet to make sure that I got them, and I saw that the price of the Express Passes was $260 a ticket. Now this is way more than the price of Express Pass for regular Universal and Islands of Adventure, and it also didn't include Harry Potter, the Ministry of Magic, the Donkey Kong ride, and another flat ride that wasn't a big headliner but was not included for capacity reasons. It sucks spending that much money, but ultimately I felt enormous relief that I could kind of enjoy my day leisurely without having to worry about cramming everything in a short period of time. Now, by the time that Express Passes went on sale, I'm 99% sure that opening day had sold out already, and given the exorbitant price of the Express Passes, that told me that opening day was poised to be extremely crowded and unbearable. The only other possibility was that Universal was capping attendance very low in order to give the day one guests a premium low-wait experience, but then why were they charging so much for Express Pass? As I did my best to mentally prepare for what the opening day was going to be like, I recalled from theme park history, oftentimes for theme park openings, there's a reverse psychology effect when it comes to attendance. For opening days, most people assume that the crowds are going to be unbearable, so they stay home, like with what happened in the opening weeks of Galaxy's Edge. For some reason, this doesn't happen when it comes to singular ride openings. When you're talking about theme park lands or an entire theme park, they traditionally have mild opening days. Since Epic was sold out, I wasn't sure whether to trust that this phenomenon was going to happen again, but a voice in the back of my head kept telling me that it might be possible. Leading up to May, the novelty of seeing Epic Universe on opening day began to diminish as Universal started offering soft opening previews to team members and then annual pass holders, and eventually anyone in the general public could just buy a ticket to Epic Universe prior to opening day. I did the best job that I could to avoid spoilers because I wanted to walk into this park with the least amount of preconceived notions possible. While the vast majority of people were hyped to see Epic Universe in previews, there were a few criticisms that I saw leak through my Twitter feed that I kept in the back of my mind as I visited, and I'll bring those up throughout the review as relevant. So even though I was far from the first person to experience what Epic had to offer, I was extremely hyped to be there for the opening day of the first Disney or Universal theme park to open domestically since 2001. Now, the footage that you're seeing right now is from the day before, and the hype was absolutely palpable. Actually, that's a lie. It just felt like any other day at City Walk, but I was hyped. I went to the Epic Preview Center for one last look at the model before I checked out the real thing. I remember going to the Preview Center like a year earlier and seeing the model and thinking about how awesome it was going to be in real life, and in like 12 hours, I was finally going to be there. Now, one weird thing about the day before is that apparently there was a kiosk at City Walk that was selling last-minute single-day tickets to Epic Universe. But what was even more peculiar is that I didn't see not one goddamn person in line to buy any of these stealth drop tickets. Was Universal trying to make their already insanely crowded opening day even more crowded? Or did Universal way undersell tickets for an opening day that they themselves capped ticket sales for? The other thing I was keeping an eye on was the grand opening happening that day, which was essentially the media day with all the celebrities and important people. This is very common with theme parks nowadays, where they'll have a media day the day before the official opening to the public. I did watch the entire grand opening celebration. It's kind of fun if you like the hype that comes with live events. There's some fun awkward moments.
Whether you're bonding with Toothless or bumping into a Viking in the street, the Isle of Berk makes every guest feel like a member of the clan.
Kirk Cousins shows up at one point for some reason.
I'm sure fans and fantasy owners want to know, how's the off-season going?
Yeah, it's going well.
Like, if you ever wanted to watch a series of one-question interviews with celebrities, this is the event for you. Other than that, there really weren't any big reveals. But they did get an absolutely insane fireworks show that surpassed any kind of nighttime show Universal has ever had. With little people coming on the official park opening date also get an amazing fireworks show? Only time would tell. But the answer is no. Now, the day before Epic Universe, I was exhausted because I just spent like a week at Walt Disney World, and due to some travel plans that changed last minute, I had to squeeze IOA and Universal Studios in on the day before Epic Universe, and then get up early to try to be among the first people in line for Epic Universe. Now, I was at my limit, but I made sure to get to bed as early as possible because while I just had a very long day, I knew that the next day was going to be even longer. On May 22nd, 2025, I woke up at approximately 5:10 a.m. It sucked, but it was definitely the coolest thing I've ever woken up at 5 a.m. for because I was going to the grand opening of a theme park. I made sure that we had everything ready to go the night before because I wanted to make sure we could leave the hotel in like 5 minutes and head straight to the buses because I had no idea what the bus situation was going to be like. Guests were told that buses were going to start running at around 6 a.m., so I made sure to get there about a half hour early in case there was a line building up. We wandered around trying to find the bus stop because, in my opinion, Sapphire Falls is a really confusing resort to navigate, and when we headed to the main lobby, we just saw Shrek hanging out for some reason. It was so bizarre because it wasn't even like there was a sign that said, Shrek welcomes you to Epic Universe or anything like that. It was just Shrek. I wonder if maybe they expected more people to be in the lobby of Sapphire Falls for this epic grand opening, or maybe Shrek just hangs out in the lobby of Sapphire Falls at 5 a.m. So after getting stuck behind Shrek's slow ass, we made it to the bus stop, and the very nice team member there told us that they had actually been running buses since 5. I guess they just lied to guests. Still, she said that we were one of the first and they'd only picked up a handful of guests so far. So I thought, great, we're making good time. I did see on Twitter that some guests had already been lining up for Epic Universe as early as 4 a.m. And I just thought, you can have that. I'm not getting up that early to get into this park. That's all you. I want to get there early, but not that bad. So we got on the bus with a few other guests, and the vibe could only be described as a World War II U-boat. No one said a word, and it was eerily quiet. As we got closer, first I realized that Epic is really fucking far away from the rest of Universal, but my excitement peaked when I saw in the distance the Grand Helios Hotel that I'd only seen in pictures before. Then I saw the ridges of Super Nintendo World, and then the back of Frankenstein's castle. At that point, that ominous aura was replaced with excitement that I was finally here after all this waiting. And then there was a line to get in. Eventually, we found the back of the line in the middle of the parking lot, seemingly behind a park full of guests. The experience waiting in line was pretty fun. There were Universal team members keeping up the energy. I spotted a lot of YouTubers and vloggers who I respected. No actual celebrities, just kind of YouTubers and vloggers, which is kind of the difference between the grand openings of this stuff and opening days. And yeah, it just felt really nice to be in on this hype with so many other people. Around 6:30 a.m., they started letting in both lines of people, and we got through the gates pretty quickly. I also want to comment on how friendly and kind every single team member that we interacted with was. We had an issue with our tickets, and long story short, this dude at the front gate helped us out and got us in, so shout out to that guy. This is going to be a theme throughout this video, but despite some of the negative things that happened on that day, every single team member was so kind and helpful and just excited to be there in a way that I've never seen any other team of people. They all seemed so genuinely excited to be there and be a part of this theme park opening, and I've just never seen anything like it. When it was all said and done, we got through the park gates in about 20 minutes, so not bad. It was around 7:50 with the park opening at 9 a.m., so after soaking in the majesty of the Epic Tower, we headed into lineup for our first portal of the day. Our plan was to tackle Harry Potter and the Battle of the Ministry first. While doing that might seem too obvious, it was the right move in my opinion for a couple reasons. First, Ministry was plagued with reliability concerns throughout its soft opening, and if we waited to do it and there was huge downtime in the middle of the day, the line at the end of the day would be unbearable, or the ride may never reopen at all, and we wouldn't get to ride it. I wanted to get this ride out of the way early so we could wait in what would be, in theory, its shortest wait of the day, because the longer a theme park day goes on, the more guests show up. The second reason is that our express passes did not cover Ministry, so by knocking out the ride first, even if the park was really busy, we could coast for the rest of the day since almost every other ride in the park had express. So after that executive decision, we headed to the back of the park and got in line for the Harry Potter portal. While we were walking at a semi-brisk pace, I was immediately taken aback by how beautiful Celestial Park is in early morning. I was almost regretful that we were speed walking because it seemed like such a nice environment to hang out in. I quickly realized that Epic Universe will be at its peak once annual pass holders and guests with hoppers can just show up to this park without the stress of having to squeeze the most value out of their day tickets. Celestial Park has a number of bars, a pizza place, a Pan-Asian restaurant, and as cliche as this sounds, it really put the word park back in theme park. I should also probably mention the weather at this point. Despite the early morning, the heat was oppressive. The entire week leading up to that day, I think the real feel averaged at around 100 degrees. So a week of walking through that, and then this early morning, my body was at its limit. But to Universal's credit, they did actually hand out free water bottles to guests. Not even like little tiny ones, but like full-sized regular water bottles. It was a small gesture, but it did add a little special flair to opening day, and for what it's worth, I don't think there would be any circumstance in which Disney would ever hand out $5 water bottles to guests for free. I just want to mention quickly too, prior to getting in line for Harry Potter, I went to the bathroom outside of the Harry Potter portal, and I don't know if it was just the hype of Epic Universe taking over me, but the bathroom was immaculate. It was super clean, it smelled fresh. I didn't get any footage of the bathroom for obvious reasons, but I know that bathrooms are like a hot topic when it comes to Disney and Universal, and there's a lot of conversation about these public bathrooms. This one was cream of the crop. So we lined up for the Harry Potter portal, and we were pretty deep back. We heard there was going to be some kind of kickoff before the land opened, so while we wanted a good view of that, we probably weren't going to get to see anything from where we were. The grand opening the day prior had this really in-depth show at each portal where characters came out and interacted with guests. For example, Victoria Frankenstein came out of the Monsters portal and spoke to guests, although it was later confirmed this would never happen ever again for God knows what fucking reason. Since none of us who were there were important at all, I didn't expect a crazy show, but I figured we'd see at least a little something. We got to our portal around 7:15 a.m. While we were pretty far back, the stanchions and barricades extended way behind where we were, doubling back a few times near Stardust Racers, indicating that Universal was expecting much more guests to line up than were already there. With our spot secured, I started to get FOMO over all the people buying merch, so I snuck off to buy some stuff before Epic sold out. On the way over, I got more views of Celestial Park and the other portals. The barricades for How to Train Your Dragon Isle of Berk were much more modest by comparison to ours. I made my way to the gift shop at the front of the park, and while again the staff were super kind and helpful, this is where I encountered the first big controversy of the day. In the lead up to opening day, Universal announced they would be selling these day one medallions to guests who bought tickets to opening day. Now, I'm not a big medallion or coin guy, but I thought these were pretty cool. The problem was that Universal decided to sell all of the opening day medallions to the media at the grand opening before any of the actual guests who paid for an opening day ticket had an opportunity to buy them. Now, unlike most people, I do understand that these parks have to suck up to the important people that show up on these media days. Important people like social media stars, celebrities, etc. But there's absolutely no reason why selling this exclusive medallion to the press was essential to pampering them. This was an invite-only red carpet event. None of the salt of the earth people could buy tickets to purchase this medallion. Not to mention, May 21st was not day one. It was day zero. None of the people who actually went on day one could get a day one medallion. I didn't even want the damn thing to begin with, but then I became livid because I didn't even have the opportunity to buy one. I can't imagine why they thought this would go over well with day guests, and it's unfortunate because the people that I saw that had to deal with the backlash from this weren't the executives that made that decision, but the team members who were doing everything in their power to make that day as special as it could be. At around 7:50, I headed back to my family, went through the mob of people, which really didn't grow that much, and waited for this opening celebration. Suddenly at 8 o'clock, everyone started making noise, and this elusive celebration finally kicked off. There was an announcement welcoming us to Epic Universe.
Good morning, travelers. On behalf of the thousands of team members across Universal Orlando Resort, we'd like to welcome you to Universal Epic Universe.
And then we heard,
"It is now our pleasure to introduce Steven Spielberg."
I couldn't see anything, but it became clear that Steven Spielberg was only present in the form of a pre-recorded message. The rest of the celebration was just that each portal shot fireworks out of it and played some music from that land, and the whole thing lasted like 5 minutes. So after all that, the park didn't open for another like 55 minutes, and we all wondered, are they really going to make us just wait around for the next hour? Luckily, shortly after, they started letting people into the lands, and this is where the action really started. You might have seen this video online of people running to get in line for the new Harry Potter ride, which everyone criticized because it was adults being cringy for being excited about something. For the record, I didn't actually see any of that. In the back of the line where I was, it was pretty tame. While I was keeping up with the crowd, I was also doing my best to take in the land, which, like the rest of the park, was beautiful and ornate. Obviously, Paris is the least flashy of any of the lands in Epic, but it still contains a level of detail that makes you excited to be in that space. There were all these team members that were clapping and welcoming us into the land, and yeah, it was just a cool little moment. Team members did the best job they could to manage this insane crowd and filter us into a single file line. Before the park even opened at 9 a.m., we slowly made our way to the official start of the queue. I saw the flow tunnels, and I thought to myself, there's the flow entry, we're pretty much at the front of the line already. Little did I know. So we're in line, and I can see there are a few switchbacks before the line heads into some kind of outdoor extended queue before coming back into the flow tunnels. Suddenly, I'm looking at my phone, and it finally turns 9 a.m., and we're not moving. It's a few minutes after 9, and then we hear the inevitable announcement from a member of the ride team that the ride would not be opening on time.
Despite our best efforts, we are still experiencing a delay in operation at this attraction. We are working diligently to open for your enjoyment, but do not currently have an estimate time of opening.
You might have seen a lot of headlines like this saying stuff like, Harry Potter Ministry of Magic opens to a 5-hour wait on opening day, but that's not entirely accurate. At the time the park opened at 9 a.m., Universal estimated the wait time to be 240 minutes from that point.
It says 240, I don't think it's going to be that long.
However, no one actually got to ride the ride until like 3 o'clock, and after that, I don't think there was a posted wait time of over 90 minutes. A lot of people quickly got out of line to try to salvage their day, but I wanted to stay because we had the express passes for the other rides. We'd already been effectively in line for this ride since 7:30, so why waste that time? With people bailing, the line started to slowly creep forward, and when I turned the corner into the outside extended queue, I saw what can only be described as queue hell. Upon seeing this endless collection of switchbacks, there was something in the pit of my theme park gut that told me that I was going to be in store for the most absolutely brutal queue experience of my life. For those maybe not familiar with theme park terminology, switchbacks are just lines generally divided with chain links that double back on each other with little to no theming. While they're obviously very cheap and very effective at utilizing a space, they're also horrendous to spend time in. In theme park psychology, as well as just regular psychology, waits feel less long when you don't see how long the wait actually is, and when you're able to be constantly entertained with new rooms or things to look at. Obviously, this eats up space and is expensive, but Disney and Universal do the best job they can to keep guests entertained with immersive queues. But that immersion can realistically only extend so far, and so popular rides have extended queues designed not for entertainment, but to eat up the most amount of guests in the smallest space possible to keep the line from overflowing into guest walkways. While I guess you can't ask much from an extended queue, for some reason, Ministry's queue just felt extremely sinister and evil. This is a minor complaint, but there's one part of the extended queue that leads seemingly outside the berm of the park, and all there is like a half wall separating you from a team member parking lot. I'm not trying to sound like a Karen here, but I don't know why Universal wouldn't just set up some potted plants here to kind of maintain the illusion. I don't know, something about seeing that almost empty team parking lot in this long ass line just felt very depressing. Even more irritating, in the extended queue, there's this fake French radio station that plays music while you wait to set the mood and establish the setting of the land. But there's this DJ who periodically makes announcements in universe. I started to get really annoyed because I would think they'd be updating us that the ride was about to open, and I would just be like hearing this fake DJ talk about stupid magic bullshit. And a few times that we did hear a real announcement, it was always a team member, I think his name was like Josh, telling us that despite their best efforts, the ride was still not going to be opening, and they did not have a time frame. They eventually announced over the loudspeaker that the ride still wasn't open, but they were going to be opening up more of the indoor queue to let more people into the AC.
However, in a few moments, the queue will begin to move to bring more guests into the Ministry air conditioning. We will continue to keep you informed of all of our progress and appreciate your patience. Once again, in a few moments, the queue will begin to move forward to bring you into the Ministry air conditioning.
Again, it kind of kills the illusion to call the Ministry of Magic just some AC, but under those circumstances, I would have done anything for some additional shade. Around 2 hours after the park opened, we finally made it out of that cursed extended queue, and they started handing us more water bottles and snacks, which I thought was a nice consolation. We had actually made a lot of progress in that line since 9 a.m., and we weren't sure if that was because of all the people that were bailing, or if there might have been something else going on. More on that later. Finally, we entered the flow tunnel, but this was probably the worst possible circumstance to view that effect under. What you're supposed to do is snap your hand like you're dropping flow powder, but no one ever explained that to us. I could see little grates where smoke was supposed to come out, so I kind of figured something was missing when guests were just walking down this curved corridor and unceremoniously showing up in the Ministry. I guess because they wanted to rush people into the AC, they didn't want to slow them down with anything fun. But yeah, basically just push people through this tiny connecting tunnel with no excitement. The Ministry room is extremely impressive even without this flow effect, but I imagine that reveal after being barraged with smoke makes it that much more exciting. After making it through the flow tunnels, I got the reveal of the Ministry, and yeah, it was really impressive. I can't say I was blown away because of all the waiting we'd done up to this point and the lack of the flow effect, but I assume under better circumstances, and if you're a Harry Potter fan, it's gotta be incredible to see this in person. Like the rest of the park, the main Ministry queue is beautiful, and I never want to go in there ever again because that room was my prison for 2 more hours. I had plenty of time to soak in the details of the little offices lining the walls, the fountain in the center, the news bulletin of Umbridge and the Minister, and the music loop that I listened to over and over and over and over and over again. While all this was going on, I checked the Universal app and saw low wait times across the park. There were a lot of people on Twitter gloating about not being stuck in the Ministry line and getting to experience the rest of the park with no lines. I didn't feel too bad because I knew we had our express passes, but it really started to set in how many hours we had burned in this fucking prison. Our progress slowed more and more until finally around 12:30, after spending 3.5 hours in the Ministry queue, we saw some maintenance team members walking away from what I assumed was the loading station. Their expression was neutral, And then I noticed the line started moving pretty quickly, and I thought this might be a good thing. But I realized we were moving too quickly. This is a good theme park tip if you find yourself in a similar situation. When a ride is experiencing so much downtime that it's no longer worth it for guests to keep standing by, it will ask everyone to leave, usually offering them return passes for a quicker queue than the normal standby once the ride becomes operational. They can't do this if the queue is too long, because if too many people get return passes, then that return line will not be fast at all, and it will make the standby line basically non-functional. The way that you can tell if a ride is operating again versus if you're getting dumped is by the pace at which you're moving. If your line is pulsing after a breakdown, that means that people are being properly grouped and then loaded onto a ride vehicle, etc., etc. If you're constantly moving at a steady pace, that's usually not a good thing because it means people are being handed out return passes and being sent on their way. Naturally, we were the latter, so we were given one gray pass to be used on either Ministry or Donkey Kong or any other ride we really wanted to, and a blue pass to be used on any ride besides Ministry and Donkey Kong. Honestly, I wasn't even that mad because I was just so happy to be out of that goddamn queue, but it was 1 o'clock and we had ridden absolutely nothing. Also later in the day, I'd heard from a couple that the reason we were moving up so quickly was because we weren't the only group that was getting dumped. That couple told me that they had been dumped at about 10:30, meaning Universal had partially dumped some people in the queue while leaving other people stuck in the queue to suffer, like us. That was kind of annoying because if you don't think the ride is going to be up anytime soon, if it's down enough to dump some people, why not just dump everybody? I get that this means handing out more return passes, which Universal doesn't want to do, but the ride is just as down for the people in the front of the line as it is for the people in the back of the line. In the morning, the line for Ministry extended well past the actual entrance of the queue, and before we even entered the float portal, we saw Universal cut off more people from getting in line, likely to prevent the amount of people who would need to get dumped and be given a return pass. I totally get that, but if you've already capped the amount of people that can get in this line, why even mess around? Just dump everyone and let them go on their way. But whatever. On the way out, I did get the flow powder effect to work by just snapping my fingers, and I admit it did feel pretty cool. I will defend my decision to keep us in line for Ministry of Magic. I think given the circumstances, it was the right play. But theme parks are a lot like blackjack. Sometimes you can make the right move with the wrong outcome. Nothing you can do. I did my best to rally our group to make up the time that we had missed. The Fantastic Beasts show, which is right near Ministry, did not have any show times within 45 minutes, and spirits were pretty low with my family, seeing as it was lunchtime, we had not done anything. I wasn't worried that we wouldn't get to do everything because we still had 9 more hours in the park, and even with Ministry down, wait times were still incredibly low across the board. I then decided that we should head to the Isle of Berk, aka the land based on How to Train Your Dragon. This is Berk. This was maybe the land I was most excited to see because as of like a month before I went, I became a huge How to Train Your Dragon fan. I recall the first movie coming out around the time I officially grew out of kids movies, so I always kind of wrote that movie off as just dumb kid slop. But the first movie had so much heart, and if you're like me and skipped it when it came out, I highly recommend watching these movies before you go to Epic, or at least just the first one. Isle of Berk is supposed to take place between the second and third movie when Viking and Dragon Society is at its peak. Now this will be a relevant detail later. The moss on the hilltops, the architecture and how it looks appropriately hobbled together like Berk from the movie, it's stunning how much this just looks like the concept art that Universal presented. A big part of building a land is kinetics. Is a land exciting to look at? Is it dynamic? Are things moving? Berk nails this. You got Hiccup's wing gliders darting across the water, Dragon Racer's rally soaring through the air, fire drill in the water. There's action everywhere you look, and it's beautiful. I will say, Berk appears very accurate to Berk in the movies, which also means that there is almost no shade anywhere in this land. On a hot summer day, like when I was there, the heat in Berk can be oppressive. And when I stopped inside one of the mead halls, I could just imagine how crowded those areas could get once it storms, and that's virtually the only place in the entire land that you could run to for shelter. I guess that's a sacrifice Universal had to make for accuracy, so just hope that whenever you go to Epic, it's nice, temperate weather. There are also dragons everywhere in this land. Some are obvious, and some are more hidden. Some are static, some are walking, and some are flying. Yeah, while this effect wasn't working on opening day and as of the time of this recording, supposedly Universal has been experimenting with using drones to have flying dragons, which is not something we've ever seen before, at least here at domestic parks. There's also a lot of human characters walking around, which all ties the land together. You got the two twins walking around harassing people, Gobber is there, and the streetmosphere really makes Berk feel authentic. Now, one thing I want to talk about is the continuity of the land. So in a preview of the land, Universal confirmed that this land takes place in between How to Train Your Dragon 2 and 3, which is the height of Viking society.
How to Train Your Dragon Isle of Berk takes place between the second and third movies. We call it Berk 2.5.
This is the golden age of harmony between Vikings and dragons.
This makes sense, especially considering how the third movie ends. However, there's absolutely zero regard for timeline continuity in this land, which you could regard as a good or a bad thing. For one, you can meet Toothless's kid, which doesn't happen till the end of the third movie. Also, I'm pretty sure I've seen video online of Astrid calling Hiccup her husband, which also doesn't happen until the third movie. Now, is this the end of the world? Absolutely not, but it does hurt the cohesion just a little bit. When you look at Galaxy's Edge, some people argue that that land is too beholden to lore, and it's dumb that it refused to break the time period that it took place in for so long. But when this continuity isn't there, you realize that it's just a bit harder to immerse yourself on who characters are and the relationship to others in the world around them. Now onto the actual rides. Now flashback to my family, we just finished waiting 4 hours to do nothing at Harry Potter World, and they needed something to eat, so I went on this ride that they weren't interested in. Dragon Racer's Rally is basically just a regular flat ride, but with an admittedly cool twist. You fly around on this thing, and you have these dragon wing handles where you get to control your movement. What I really liked about this ride is that there wasn't just like a joystick that you use to control your movement. You literally move your wings and the forces of nature respond in kind, so it was a very cool tactile thing. When I got in line, there was absolutely no wait for this ride, so I got grouped into a station where the pre-show had already started. I also rode this ride one other time where I also got grouped after the pre-show started, and as a result, I never really learned how to do anything cool like go upside down. The pre-show might clear that up, but I didn't see it. But anyway, once it's your turn, you go and pick your seat and fly. Honestly, if you're worried about going upside down by accident, it's hard to go upside down even if you really want to. It's actually a nice peaceful ride if you don't try to do anything, so if you're worried about the ride being too intense, just don't do anything with your wings, and it's really enjoyable. This ride isn't exactly a headliner, obviously, it's not meant to be, but it's a pretty cool flat ride that ties in thematically with Hiccup being a tinkerer and trying to capture that feeling of flying at your own whim. Also, minor note, due to this ride's low capacity, this ride you're also not able to use Express Pass for. So just to be clear, the $260 Express Passes that we paid for still have not gotten used after 4.5 hours in the park. After riding that mildly amusing flat ride, our next attraction was to see the Untrainable Dragon, which was a stage show that was lifted from a show called Untrainable at Universal Beijing. I heard a lot of buzz about this show actually, so I was really excited to see how they would bring the story of How to Train Your Dragon to life in a stage show form. I thought the show would maybe be like a loose retelling of the movie, but no, I was absolutely wrong. The show is about Hiccup's village asking him to train this dragon, which is just so untrainable. Upon hearing the title of the stage show, I incorrectly assumed that it would be about Hiccup struggling to train Toothless. In reality, the untrainable dragon is clearly supposed to be Cloud Jumper, or at least a dragon that's easily mistakable for Cloud Jumper. Based on the wing markings, I guess it's a different dragon than Cloud Jumper, but the design is so similar, and I was super confused throughout the whole show. Anyway, on to the story. The show opens with a really dumb and pandering song about how together we're strong. Don't get me wrong, I understand that How to Train Your Dragon is for kids, but the movies were a lot less kiddie and had a much wider appeal. This is the type of song you would hear on like a kid's Saturday morning cartoon. It got the show started off on a really dumb note, and it felt like it was written by someone who did not understand How to Train Your Dragon. The next song was fine, I guess. But there's a really sick part where the music swells and we see Hiccup and Toothless emerge through the clouds, backed by the epic How to Train Your Dragon theme. They fly directly over top the entire audience in an effect that I've never seen before, and this single effect almost saves the entire show for me. After Hiccup and Toothless land, they're warned about this captured dragon, which is just so untrainable.
There is a dangerous dragon. We need to get off Berk. It's untrainable.
The aforementioned dragon comes out, which I guess is a cousin of Cloud Jumper, and it's a really cool gigantic puppet. More on gigantic puppets later whenever we talk about the Harry Potter stage show. There was one point in the show where a bunch of other dragons show up, and during a scene change, I guess, they couldn't get the dragons to go away, so the show just awkwardly paused. This lasted about 5-ish minutes before the show continued, and between Harry Potter to start the day and this, needless to say, we were not thrilled with our epic experience so far. Eventually, the production team resolved the issue, and the show continued.
You gotta be kidding me.
In the final part of the show, they find out that the reason the dragon was so untrainable was that the dragon is a she, and it was just protecting its egg.
That's a pretty strong bond, Bennington child. There is nothing stronger. No wonder he couldn't train her.
So just to recap this story, the plot of the stage show is that there's a dragon that's really hard to train because it's protecting its egg. And then they figure out it's protecting its egg. And that's the show. I thought the entire premise of this show was really dumb, and the only thing that saves it from being a complete pass is the cool Toothless soaring over the crowds effect, and the dragon itself, which is pretty impressive at that size. If you're in the area, this show isn't a terrible way to kill some time, but it's dumbed down and made for kids in a way that a How to Train Your Dragon product should be better than. Also, we did use our Epic Express Pass for the first time, and it did absolutely nothing because the show was going to start in like 5 minutes, which is sort of on us, but they probably shouldn't have let us even use it. After finally riding my first ride, which one could call a glorified flat ride, and seeing a pretty disappointing show, my dad and I quickly moved on to the first premier ride of the day, Hiccup's Wing Gliders. We did attempt to use our Express Pass here for the first time, but luckily the team member at the front talked us out of it because there was literally no line. So yet again, zero value out of this Express Pass so far. So as for the ride itself, this is by far the most underrated ride at the entire park. It's the first thing you'll notice when you enter Berk as the ride dances around the architecture of the land. It also has a really fun story that it tells really well. You are riding one of Hiccup's inventions that is meant to simulate flying on the back of a dragon. But of course it doesn't go perfectly, and his invention causes you to go careening throughout the island of Berk. That's the gist. Now on to spoiler territory, because believe it or not, there is some stuff you could spoil on this ride. At the beginning of the ride, I was really impressed to see this Toothless and Hiccup AA as you enter the first launch. The launch itself really takes you by surprise. I don't know if it's the story that sells it, but you really feel like you're being propelled by a sling. Hiccup's frantic narration feels like a scene from the movies and adds to the fun, chaotic tone of the ride. You then find yourself in a nest of nargholes, I think they're called. Basically, they're just little creatures that explode. Your vehicle attempts to drive through the nest, but valleys as you're sent back into the nest of exploding creatures. Quick aside, I just want to say how amazing it is that this is a coaster with like a multi-act structure. It's hard enough to tell a story with a coaster as it is, but this one has like a mid-act break. Anyway, the coaster has a second launch. You careen past some Viking structures and dragons as the How to Train Your Dragon theme swells, and it's just this really epic feeling. Phenomenal ride, especially for fans of the movies. If you're concerned about the speed of this ride, in my opinion, it goes right up to the edge of what I would consider a family coaster without crossing it. The emotion it conjures isn't fear, but joy and whimsy, much like you're riding on the back of an actual dragon. With the narration of Hiccup coupled with the musical score, you can't help but feel like you're in How to Train Your Dragon. As a recent fan of the films, it gave me goosebumps every time I rode it. To round out the land, my dad and I rode Fire Drill, the only water attraction in the entire park. I think the most important thing to enjoy this ride is to set the correct expectations. The premise is that you're Vikings training for the inevitable fire breakout due to dragon breath. Your goal is to use a water cannon to put out fake mechanical fires, although you'll likely catch some strays from the equipment as well as other Vikings. First of all, I thought this attraction was really beautiful. The way Universal captures that hobbled together, handcrafted Berk aesthetic from the movies was really impressive. I feel like if I waited an hour not knowing what that ride was, I would be disappointed, but knowing it was just 5 minutes with a Super Soaker on a slow moving platform, I was satisfied. I got relatively wet, although I dried very quickly in the hot Florida sun. If you mind your own business and don't start shit with the other boats, you'll probably stay dry, although I very much did try to start shit with the other boats. All in all, check out this ride from above before riding it. If it interests you, go for it. If not, you'll get the gist of it just from watching it from above. I do quickly want to mention the Hiccup and Toothless meet and greet. This is the one thing I wanted to do that unfortunately I did not have time for. The posted wait time averaged around 60 minutes on opening day when all the other rides were like walk-ons, so I would expect that to be a good bit higher on a normal day. Everything I've seen from that experience makes it look phenomenal. Universal calls Toothless an animatronic, although I'm pretty confident that it's puppeteered at least to some capacity. Toothless has a lot of articulation in his face, you can feel his breath. I imagine for even a casual fan, a meeting like this has to be amazing. That meet and greet seemed to be going on all day, which surprised me. It's just the downside is I don't think you're guaranteed to meet with Hiccup. I guess sometimes you'll get lucky and meet Toothless with Hiccup and Astrid there too. And other times it's just a random Viking guy. Personally, I'd feel ripped off if I waited like an hour to meet Hiccup and Toothless and at the last minute they just swapped him out for some random Viking dude. For what it's worth, the random guy was there towards nighttime when I didn't even expect the meet and greet to be open, so maybe the closer you are to park close, the more likely you are to get the B team out there. So that was Isle of Berk, and prior to checking back on Ministry, I wanted to try Stardust Racers, which like the rest of the park had absolutely no wait. While I don't think this is the official aim of the attraction, I interpreted Stardust Racers as Universal's attempt to host the most intense roller coaster in all of Orlando. And anyone who would just watch this coaster in operation would understand, yeah, they pretty much achieved that. Stardust is a dueling coaster, one where there are two sides you can pick from with slight differences, and the two tracks interact with each other. Now, while I have a lot of love for the coaster community, unfortunately I am not among them, so apologies if some of my evaluations sound a little naive. The thing about evaluating coasters is that all theme park rides or amusement park rides tell a story. Whether it's a very detailed dark ride created by Disney or an old janky Ferris wheel at your local amusement park, the goal of all these attractions is to tell some kind of story. In this regard, roller coasters are equivalent to abstract paintings. They tell a story that is vague, formless, and without words, and you're either in tune with what these coasters are trying to say, or you're not. I am not. But what I can say is that I fucking loved Stardust Racers. I rode both tracks, one during the day and one at night. If I had to pick, I think I liked the yellow track just a bit more because that was my first experience, but I really didn't notice much difference in the track layout. On my first ride through, I waited one extra cycle for the front row because why not? And I was paired up with this other dude who had a buddy on the opposite track. The ride starts with an LIM launch, if my coaster terminology is correct. And what I love is you get launched, your stomach sinks, and then the train accelerates again and you like get super launched. This happens again later on in the coaster where there's like a brake run, except you accelerate even further, so it's kind of the opposite of a brake run. Velocicoaster does the same thing, and yeah, that feeling of going fast and then being launched into the next gear is absolutely wild. What I love most about Stardust Racers is, if you forgive me for sounding pretentious, the experience that I had was like communal. During that brake run, the dude next to me was like pumping his fist, cheering on his buddy, and then as we were flipping around, he was like pointing him out, and it was just so magical. I'm not sure how difficult this would be to coordinate on a normal park day, but if you can ride in the same row as a buddy on the opposite train, do it. I weirdly felt a connection with everyone else on this ride as our bodies were getting tossed around at inhuman speeds through space together. I don't know, that's probably super weird, but it's a feeling I've never experienced on any other attraction anywhere. And yeah, unfortunately that's all I can really say about Stardust Racers because I'm not very articulate when it comes to evaluating coasters. But there is one more controversy I need to bring up with regards to this ride. See, whenever this ride first opened as part of the soft openings for Epic Universe, a lot of people noticed that something smelled. And no, I'm not talking churros, I'm talking caca, I'm talking doo-doo, I'm talking pee-pee. Very close to Epic Universe, basically on like the other side of the street, is a water treatment facility. A lot of people reported faint, unpleasant smells at certain areas of the park, particularly at Stardust when the wind was blowing in the wrong direction, and I'm sad to report that I'm pretty sure I smelled it too. Now, to be fair, it wasn't at Stardust, it was at Harry Potter, but yeah, I did smell shit. I don't know why Universal thought it was a good idea to build their theme park next to a dookie factory. I don't know if there was just no other plots of land available to them. And honestly, it's not like overwhelming. It's a very faint whiff where you're like, yeah, that kind of smells like poo. But yeah, the poop smell is a very real thing, I am sorry to report. But it did not affect my enjoyment of the ride. I still love Stardust Racers, and you could call me one of its fans. You might even say that I am a Stardust Crusader. So after we finished off Berk and knocked off Stardust, we decided to go back to the Ministry to see if anything had developed. We'd been checking in the Universal app throughout the day to see if the ride came back online, and the ride went from delayed to not having any designation at all, which I thought might mean something. When we got over there, the ride was still down, but my spider sense was tingling that something might be happening soon. I wanted to stay in the area, and we were hungry, so we stopped at Café l'Air de la Serene, since it's right next to Ministry. But right after we placed our order, I noticed some commotion outside the window. Some kind of line was forming, so I immediately ran from the seat and told my family to grab our stuff and get out there. It turns out, Ministry, after like 5 hours, finally opened. The restaurant was very kind, and they allowed us to hold our order until we got off the ride. Within minutes, the line extended to pretty much the beginning of the land, although this was before they actually let any guests into the physical queue. We were told to get in a single file line until we got to the official entrance of the line, where they finally took our Gray Express passes and we were put in an expedited queue. And at long last, finally it was time to ride Harry Potter and the Ministry of Magic. I'm not going to say much more about the queue other than that it felt like I was returning home in a way. Like I said earlier, as beautiful and impressive as that queue is, I don't think I ever want to go in there ever again if I can help it. Because we were pretty close to the front of the line whenever the ride opened, we only ended up waiting about 15 minutes. And to my surprise, there was still a lot of queue to go from where we had gotten dumped earlier in the day. I guess we were lucky in that the big open area was undoubtedly the most interesting place to get stuck at, and also has easy access to the outside. But yeah, if you're in that big open area and are wondering how close you are to your vehicle, you are not close at all. Also, if I was stuck that morning waiting in one of these little tiny hallways for 4 hours, I probably would have had a panic attack. Near the end of the queue, there's the house elf room that I thought would have been a pre-show room that you would get important context about the ride from. But no, it's just a random room that you walk through. You might not even catch anything this elf is saying, which I thought was kind of odd. After the elf room, there was still a bit of waiting as we had to climb some stairs, which is a recurring theme in queues at Epic Universe. And suddenly I could hear ride vehicles moving, and the elation I felt that we were finally going to get to ride was unimaginable. I kept myself relatively spoiler free with this ride, so I really had no idea what the ride vehicle was even going to be. The car itself is identical to Tower of Terror, but the car has some haptic feedback and can freely move up and down in a way that Tower of Terror can't. Also, unlike Tower of Terror, which is constricted to a single elevator shaft for its thrills, this ride vehicle moves in 3 dimensions throughout a massive show building. When we got buckled up, the team member warned some people in front of us to not cross their legs, and that is another interesting meme with this ride. During previews, I saw a lot of people say that team members warned them to not cross their legs, and at first I thought this was some kind of obscure Harry Potter reference that I didn't understand. In the morning, I was speaking to one of the team members and was joking with her, asking if I was able to cross my legs now, and she didn't know what I was talking about. Well, the ride operator was dead serious. This was a legitimate safety concern, and I have absolutely no idea why. It's so specific, and I've never heard of any other ride have this type of restriction, and it got me kind of worried. I saw a random anecdote about a Ministry preview where there was a drop on this ride that was so janky and violent that people actually got hurt and they had to shut the ride down. Maybe if you cross your legs in a certain way, a violent jolt might cause them to break at a certain angle. I don't know, but you think if a drop like that could happen, you'd probably be more concerned about a head injury than your feet. I don't know, really bizarre. So, on to the actual ride itself. In the universe of this ride, you were on one of the elevators in the Ministry of Magic, waiting to see Dolores Umbridge go on trial. The ride vehicle is constantly bobbing up and down in a way that really sells the effect. I also appreciated that this ride was not in 3D. The opening screen, which uses full motion actors, kind of has this 3D look to it. I can't really describe it, so I wonder if maybe that this was a consideration at some point, but 3D would have really ruined your view of what comes later in the attraction. Of course, things go wrong. A Death Eater breaks Umbridge out of custody. He blasts your ride vehicle with the thing, and you go flying. In the next scene, the ride opens up, and to me at least, this was the most impressive room in the entire ride. The first thing that draws your eyes is the Death Eater. This is the first animatronic I've ever seen where I thought that maybe this was an actual human. In fact, I actually thought that this figure was more impressive than anything that I saw on Monsters Unchained, which we'll talk about in a bit. Maybe him not having a face helps his believability, but yeah, this figure blew me away. There's also a great mix of physical sets and screens where you're really not sure what's real and what's digital. It reminded me of the Bourne stunt show at studios, where part of the joy is having your mind bended over what's real and what's not. The last thing that impressed me about this room was the scale of the show building. Because I'm a theme park nerd, I really try to look at the cracks in the presentation. I find myself always looking where guests aren't directed to look to see the ride structure, how effects work, etc. And so when I got to this scene, immediately I looked below it and above it, and I was just in awe at how huge this show building is. I would absolutely kill to be evacuated off of this ride because the scale here is just unlike any dark ride anywhere that I've ever seen. I started to think about the mechanics that I saw earlier that day that were fixing the ride and just wondering how the hell you even begin to operate on a ride like this. The ride vehicle then gets sent to the Department of Magical Creatures, which, as you could imagine, offers some fun story beats. You come face to face with this digital Umbridge who blasts you down to face this rhino thing. It bangs you around until he busts through a wall, and you get this really impressive reveal of a huge rhino thing animatronic. This unfortunately was kind of spoiled for me as I was waiting in line for this ride, but it's one of those things that I'm sure no one expects to see that totally takes them by surprise. After escaping the rhino thing, you come face to face with Umbridge, who uses a broken time turner, and then reality starts falling apart. Kind of an epic premise for a ride. You see a real physical Umbridge animatronic, which uses a projected face. As a side note, I can't get over how much this scene reminds me of the end of the American Adventure at Epcot, but that's besides the point. House Elf steals Umbridge's wand and blasts her with something. And then I guess Ron and Harry suck her back into reality. As you can see, I am not a Harry Potter expert. Then we get the ride's final scene where we see Umbridge's sentence handed down by the minister, life in Azkaban.
And me! We brought you a present, Minister.
Dolores Jane Umbridge, for your crimes you'll spend the rest of your days in Azkaban.
This is an outrage!
Take her away!
There's a cool projection effect of Umbridge being put in a prison uniform, which I liked. Overall, I had mixed feelings about this final scene. There are a lot of members of the Ministry Council, or whatever they are, I think they're called the Wizardgamot, and they're all mostly static figures. But the projected faces on Ron, Harry, and Umbridge look really bad. I saw an interesting video about this technology where it's not exactly the same kind of rear projection used by Disney at rides like Frozen or Seven Dwarfs Mine Train.
A digitally animated face is projected on a physically animated head and jaw. Now, this is a step above previous attempts at digital faces on animatronics. Universal has patented technology to keep her head moving while blending it with projections. And to me, it gives this comic book look about her, and it can be viewed from any angle in the room.
The idea behind traditional rear projection is that you take a rough transparent sculpt of a face and have a projection inside of the skull, which gives it color and animates it. And what we see at Epic is an evolution of this technology. Victoria Frankenstein in the queue for Monsters Unchained also has the same kind of face. And for her, I get using a projected face because she says a lot throughout the pre-show, so I'm sure it's less wear and tear than a physical face that has to speak and do tons of varied movements all day. But this is just a short scene at the end of a ride, and to be honest, doesn't look much better than the rear projection faces at Disney. I don't know if it was because they wanted it to look as close to the real actors as possible, but everyone looks like they're being strangled by plastic wrap. I'm sure Universal could make a non-projection AA look authentic, so I am puzzled why they went this direction for these figures. So that was Ministry, and after like 5-6 hours, I finally got this ride out of my life. So how was it? You know, I find in life, sometimes the longer that you wait for something, the more anticipation you build up and the more you appreciate that thing. Like if you have to wait a long time in line for a haunted house or wait in line for a movie premiere, sometimes that excitement builds up and makes you appreciate that experience more than if you had just gotten it immediately. However, I feel like that phenomenon is like a bell curve where eventually you just wait so long that it really colors that experience in a negative way. Don't get me wrong, it was extremely impressive, especially the layers of technology, the new technology that they have on this ride. But if you're not a Harry Potter fan, the long wait that you'll probably have to endure in order to experience this ride is probably not going to be worth it. This might not be the ride's fault, but it just didn't connect with me in the way that it might have if I was a hardcore Harry Potter fan. And I don't mean to sound negative because the ride is great, but I think the amount of time I spent waiting in line for this ride, it sort of soured me on the attraction, and it's really not the one thing that I can't wait to revisit the next time I go back to Epic Universe. The other thing that I heard a ton about this ride leading up to the opening of Epic was this huge drop that caught everybody by surprise. Now, I didn't feel any kind of drop on my ride experience besides the normal bobbing of the ride vehicle. But I found out later that Universal confirmed that the big drop was turned off, and I wonder if this might have been what they were struggling with in the morning. Now, I'm not sure if this is permanent. I've seen some tweets indicating that the big drop is back at Ministry. I highly doubt that such a major ride movement like that would just go away forever before the park even opens. For what it's worth, I had no idea where a big drop was supposed to have been, because usually when effects on rides are cut, guests can kind of tell, even if they're not in the know, that something should be happening that's not. My first guess was that the big drop is supposed to be whenever reality shuts down, because it's kind of an awkward transition from that scene back to the Wizard Gamont. I've yet to see footage that doesn't transition that same way, which suggests to me that it's supposed to be somewhere else. I might save the research on that, so hopefully next time I go to Epic, it'll be back and I could be surprised by what I experience, like other people that rode the ride. Now, the very last thing that I want to mention with regards to Ministry of Magic was the virtual queue that riders had to experience during Epic previews. I was extremely anxious that the virtual queue experience was going to be a big part of this video, but thankfully, Universal only used virtual queue for Ministry previews and just used normal standby for opening. Now, virtual queues are a relatively new development in the world of theme parks. To the average guest, you would think that the point of a virtual queue is to experience the wait outside of the line, and then whenever your number's called, you get to get right on the ride. But that's not really how virtual queues operate at all. A virtual queue return time isn't the time you'll get to ride the ride, but the time you'll be allowed to wait in a real line, and you could easily wait 20 to 45 more minutes in that physical line after your boarding group gets called. The real purpose of a virtual queue is to limit the amount of guests physically in the queue of a new popular ride whenever it's not deemed as reliable. The idea is that, say you only allow 300 guests in line at once using virtual queue. If the ride experiences downtime, then that's only 300 guests that you'll have to give out return complimentary fast passes to, as opposed to the thousands that would be there if the queue was open. And if the ride doesn't experience downtime, awesome, just leave the virtual queue essentially open and adjust the number of slots to the reliability of the ride that day. The problem is that getting a virtual queue spot is a fucking lottery, and everyone who used Universal's virtual queue system for Epic previews reported that it was a disaster. Unless you're a local and can go whenever you want, it is extremely anxiety-inducing to guests to have to nail this esoteric virtual queue bullshit, or you simply cannot experience an attraction. Now, all of this to say that Universal, if you are listening, as somebody who is a certified victim of the Epic Universe Opening Day 2025 Ministry of Magic disaster, that waiting a combined 5.5 to 6 hours for that one ride was an infinitely better experience than dealing with a virtual queue. Since the purpose of a virtual queue is to limit the amount of guests with negative experiences during downtime, as one of those guests with that negative experience, I promise that I would take that experience over dealing with a dumb virtual queue any day. In some ways, I kind of got what I asked for, because I said plenty of times on Twitter how they should get rid of the virtual queue and that people would much rather have to deal with ride downtimes. And you know what? I'm sticking to what I said, because I am so grateful I didn't have to deal with that stupid app. So finally, after riding Ministry, my family was very hungry, so we went back to the Harry Potter restaurant and had the food that the nice staff held for us. The best way I could describe the food here was fake fancy, and for quick service, it was pretty good. I ate both of these things, and yeah, for theme park food, I was happy with what I got. The theming in here was also pretty cool, but yeah, not really much else to say. After finishing our meal, I wanted to make sure to catch the next showing of Le Cirque Arcanu so we could get the hell out of the Wizarding World and never come back. This was one of the few attractions we used our express passes for where we did cut a decent amount of people. Again, it was a show, so we probably would have gotten to see it regardless if we used the express passes or not, but at least it did something. The Cirque Arcanu is ripped from the second Fantastic Beasts movie, which takes place in Paris. Overall, this circus is a very small part of that movie, but the larger Fantastic Beasts story is a big part of the plot of this show. The premise is that you're seeing the circus performance in the world of Harry Potter, but there's some kind of tension between the corrupt ringleader and his other workers. The ringleader wants to keep the creatures to restore the circus to its former glory, and his employee Gwendolyn gets caught in the middle. There's a really cool effect here where the outside is this small circus tent, but magically and perceptively, you're driven further and further into this big top. After waiting in line, you enter this rounded room, which at first I thought was going to be where the show took place. And honestly, I thought this would have been a unique, intimate setting for a show, but it turns out this was just the pre-show. I'm not sure if there's a word for this, but the entire attraction has this goth, carnival, freak show vibe that I really dug. Very similar to the vibe of the annual stage show at Halloween Horror Nights. After the pre-show, you get herded into the main theater for the actual show. The first thing I want to say is that the creature effects here were amazing. I especially loved this weird little thing. This was the same guy who made an appearance outdoors earlier that day during the portal celebration at 8 a.m., although I was too far back to actually see him. Just like Ministry, I was blown away by the scale of this show. And not just the creatures, which are really impressive, but also the stage itself, which lifts up to reveal the inside of Newt's suitcase in an amazing effect. Minor note, the show did pause for like 5 minutes at this point, I assume because they were struggling with the gigantic puppet that comes later on. But yeah, I was really pleasantly surprised with this show. My parents, who never saw Fantastic Beasts and don't like Harry Potter really, didn't care for this show, and I can imagine someone not familiar with Fantastic Beasts would be very lost at what Newt Scamander's suitcase is and why it's important. So I encourage people to watch the first 2 Fantastic Beasts movies before seeing this show. One other nerdy criticism I have of this show is that seeing a magic show in the world of Harry Potter just doesn't make any sense. During the actual show, you see some fun circus acts, but the point of a circus act in real life is to witness something fantastic that feels magical or supernatural. In the context of this show, we are all wizards in the world of Harry Potter. To us, magic is commonplace, so why would we be impressed with what we're seeing on stage? You might say that I'm overthinking this, but cohesion like this is important when you're talking about the highest form of immersive entertainment, which is what Epic Universe is. But regardless, I actually really love this show, and assuming that you've seen the first Fantastic Beasts, this is a must-see. Now, before we finally get out of Harry Potter World for the rest of the review, I just want to quickly talk about the land itself. Just like the rest of the park, it looks really impressive. Just by the nature of what it is, it's obviously not awe-inspiring like any of the other lands because it's just a city that exists in real life with a few twists. But the land does transport you completely into a fictional version of Paris. I didn't try any of the wand stuff because I don't have one, but it seemed to all be relegated into one corner of the land. I saw a couple of clips online of creatures that I didn't even see, like the weird llama looking thing. I did come across an interactive painting that was really cool. It was talking to guests, very reminiscent of the water fountain in the Lost Continent and the night bus in studios. The technology here seemed like it was basically just a VTuber, so not exactly mind-blowing, but cool little bit of entertainment for you to stumble upon. Last thing I want to say here is that the flow of the land is kind of weird. Ministry, the Fantastic Beasts show, and the restaurant are all relegated to basically the same quadrant of the land, meaning there's a good bit of the land where a lot of guests won't even bother to pass through. And maybe this is somewhat by design, as there are a lot of areas of Diagon Alley that you won't run into if you just run straight to the ride and leave. However, this Harry Potter land feels particularly concentrated, and it's pretty clear that there was a section of the land where a second ride was either planned for opening day and scrapped, or will be the first item on Epic Universe's expansion agenda. And it does feel a little odd that Harry Potter, the headliner IP in any Universal park, has only one ride while every other land has at least 2. My speculation on what it's going to be is that it's probably not going to be an e-ticket like Ministry is, and it will probably be based on Fantastic Beasts itself. When it was first speculated that the Harry Potter ride in Epic would be based on the original series and not Fantastic Beasts, a lot of people speculated that a Fantastic Beasts ride was planned, but after the lukewarm reception of the movies, Universal canceled plans and turned what would have been an e-ticket Fantastic Beasts ride into Ministry. But reports say that this is actually false. The British Ministry of Magic was a part of this land since the ride concepts began in 2018, and prior to that, a Ministry expansion had been rumored since the opening of Diagon Alley in 2014. It's clear that there was a ride that was cut somewhere, and that it is possible that that would have been due to the fan reception of Fantastic Beasts. There's some evidence that this second ride may have been the French Ministry of Magic, which, in my opinion, sounds kind of boring and not fun. My point is, this land is clearly ripe for expansion. Currently, something feels missing that throws off the balance, but I'm sure that hole will be filled in the next few years. And already in the time it's taken me to finish this video, there's been movement on a new Harry Potter ride. Universal has already filed a permit for a new 150,000 square foot structure, which is almost certainly a show building for a new ride. While Universal wisely left room for multiple expansion plots when constructing Epic Universe, it's hard to imagine any land getting a new ride before Harry Potter, considering it's the only land with one ride. And if we look at this great aerial shot from BioReconstruct on Twitter, we can see exactly where this plot is, right next to that out-of-place section of the land that has nothing in it other than some interactive wand elements. Not to mention that Harry Potter is easily the IP with the biggest draw at Epic and could summon a second wave of buzz following Epic's initial opening. To me, all of this is just short of complete confirmation that this project is a new Harry Potter experience and that we'll be seeing it in the next 1 to 2 years. In the meantime, we have a really beautiful land full of detail, an awesome show, and one of the most technically impressive attractions anywhere in the world. Not bad. So after finally finishing the right side of the park, we made our way to the other half, starting with Dark Universe, something that I think all of us were anticipating the most. On our way over there, I did get a really good look at the Grand Helios Hotel. Like the rest of Celestial Park, the area outside of Grand Helios is really stunning. You see this epic statue of Helios himself, these awesome fountains which are used for the nighttime show, and it just seems like a really great welcome to the park if you're using the Helios exclusive entrance. Even the benches are phenomenal, which, and this is true, an anonymous inside source told me Universal paid $18,000 for, and that's not even a joke. I unfortunately did not get to go inside of Grand Helios during my first trip, but that is at the top of my to-do list next time I'm out there. But now, on to Dark Universe. The first time I came here, it wasn't very dark, and I knew that that was going to be when this area was best. However, I couldn't wait any longer to try my most anticipated attraction, Monsters Unchained. And oh my god, did this ride completely destroy my expectations. I came off of Monsters Unchained realizing that I had found my new favorite ride anywhere else in the world. If you watched my previous video, you'd know that my prior favorite ride was Splash Mountain, and while I like Tiana's, I wasn't able to scratch that itch that honestly hasn't been scratched since I rode Splash Mountain for the first time as a kid. Monsters did that, and honestly, I haven't been able to stop thinking about that ride since the moment I got off of it. Monsters Unchained and the Dark Universe as a whole is an attempt for Universal to utilize their deep horror legacy, having created essentially all of the classic monsters from the golden age of horror in the 1930s and 40s. The problem with these movies is, understandably, they're very antiquated, and while film buffs appreciate them, they have extremely limited wide appeal because they're so hard to watch for modern audiences. And consequently, Universal has cast the monsters to the side in favor of more lucrative IPs like the Minions, when they replaced the former Monsters Cafe in Universal Studios Orlando with the Minions Cafe. That one monster restaurant was essentially all of the legacy that the monsters had in Universal Orlando, so a lot of fans saw that as a slap in the face. Additionally, Universal attempted to launch a film universe reviving the classic monsters, starting with The Mummy, but apparently that Dark Universe has been completely scrapped because it did so horribly. Dark Universe at Epic rights all of those wrongs and more, at least in my opinion. While I don't identify as a horror fan myself, I imagine that any of those hardcore monster heads would have zero complaints with what they've done with Epic Universe. I'm sure the vast majority of Universal creative who worked on Dark Universe were horror nerds themselves and treated this IP with the utmost respect. But before I talk about the ride, I want to briefly touch on Darkmoor, which is the town that Dark Universe takes place in. This is an area where all of the classic monster movies are part of one canon universe, and every inch of Darkmoor is covered in appropriately gothic, creepy theming. There is a smoking well at the start of the land, which looks really cool at night. There's creepy trees everywhere, and just concept art come to life. I didn't end up eating or drinking anything there, but I did like some of the shop names. There was a shop named after Dr. Pretorius, one of the characters from Bride of Frankenstein. There was also a food stand called Food Good. I really wanted to try the quick service steak place, which serves steaks on steaks, but unfortunately I was not really hungry anytime I went there. Another standout feature is the Burning Blade Tavern. I didn't go in here, but it's a place that sells drinks and is full of monster hunters, which I thought was a cool bit of lore for a theme park land, that there's this counterfaction hunting the main characters. The Burning Blade gets its name from the burning windmill above it. This is a reference to one of the most iconic scenes in Frankenstein and maybe movies in general, where the angry villagers chase the monster to a windmill, burning it to the ground in order to stop him. This effect happened at 9:30 on the dot later in the day, so I want to say this is on a timer, maybe every like 15 minutes, but I didn't hang around to verify that. The effect is obviously best at night because you start out hearing the angry villagers and what I'm pretty sure is audio ripped straight from the movie. And then the windmill ignites. As you can see from my footage, when I went, one of the blades malfunctioned, which was disappointing, but the effect was cool nonetheless. I will say that I wasn't awe-inspired by this effect like some of the other people that I saw reporting on it. Like, a lot of people online were like, this is just the most fascinating thing I've ever seen in my life. And to me, it's like, all right, I mean, it's like a windmill on fire, but it's certainly cooler than that dumbass dragon in Diagon Alley where everyone crowds the street with their phones for like 10 minutes, clogging up traffic just to see a static statue of a dragon burst fire for 1 second. And finally, there's the walk-around characters. Igor, who's a central character on Monsters Unchained, became extremely popular online and even made an appearance on the Today Show.
You're quite famous. Well, that's what I hear. Now, Dylan, so I hear that I have this virus all of a sudden. So I go to Dr. Victoria and I say, Dr. Victoria, can you help me? I've got this virus. And she looked at me and she said, you know what she said? What? Not virus, viral. Oh.
There was always a huge crowd around him whenever I went, so I didn't get to interact with him at all. I also love the Invisible Man, which was quite popular with the ladies, I must say. There were also random violin players and manic people adding to the gothic atmosphere. However, one very disappointing reveal that I mentioned earlier is that Victoria Frankenstein, the main character of the Monsters Unchained ride, who appeared at the Important People grand celebration the day prior, was revealed to not be an actual walk-around character during normal operation. For one, it sucks to have yet another thing that the press got, but none of the little people actually get to experience who pay to come into the park. It also sucks because she's such a cool character. And she's also like really hot, but that's besides the point. Anyway, let's get to the meat of this land, Monsters Unchained. This ride undoubtedly had the most hype surrounding it, even more than Ministry. And I think a large part of that was due to the fact that Universal was the most revealing about it. There was this really sick promo they shot which contained a lot of the AAs that I watched over and over again. In it, Universal touted that these were the most advanced animatronics ever built anywhere.
Monsters Unchained has the most technologically advanced animated figures that have ever been built in the attraction.
Not just the most advanced at Universal, the most advanced anywhere. I was a little skeptical at this claim because Universal is not known for their animatronics, at least compared to Disney, but the footage they showed looked extremely impressive. Universal claimed that there were 14 AAs in the ride, which honestly I would have thought that there would have been more based on what I saw, but suffice to say this ride is dripping with AAs, all of them insanely advanced. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. The queue is as detailed as the ride itself, and I'm almost disappointed that the ride was a walk-on and I couldn't absorb any of the details. On the outside extended queue, Universal did a great job of hiding the massive show building, making it look like just more of the castle. On the inside, there's all kinds of creepy experiments, nods to the Frankenstein legacy, and even Dracula imprisoned in bat form, which I did not pick up on when I walked through the queue. I will say that this room has this wild strobing effect, which was a bit much. I don't even recall any kind of epilepsy warning whenever you get in line for this ride, and even if you don't have epilepsy, I could not imagine being stuck in a room like this for an extended period of time. And I would not be surprised if this effect gets toned down or even turned off in the months to come. In Monsters Unchained, there are 2 pre-shows. In the first, you're introduced to Igor, an amazing iteration of the classic monster character. He explains that we're to bear witness to one of Victoria Frankenstein's new experiments, and he will be controlling our ride vehicle, ensuring we survive this ordeal in one piece.
I am Igor. My job is to get you through this experiment in one piece.
In front of Igor, there's this mock-up of the ride vehicle that I thought was just a maquette that they used in development of this ride, put there as some kind of Easter egg. But then it starts moving along with the pre-show video. This little addition with the ride vehicle is so unnecessary, it did not need to be there, but I love it so much. It adds a ton of life to a room that would have otherwise been just a pre-show video of a computer-generated character. Another detail I didn't notice about this when I was there was that there were only 3 riders in the vehicle, and that's because the 4th rider was too small and fell off. But again, such a subtle little detail with some dark humor in there, so perfect. But sadly, reportedly, this detail was removed after opening day. I don't know if this ride was patronized by the biggest weenie in the world and they complained that the fallen rider was too morbid, but I really hope they bring it back because this was a fun, subtle gag. In the next room, we get an even more impressive pre-show where we get up close with Victoria Frankenstein and the Frankenstein monster. Now what you're seeing is what the pre-show is supposed to look like. On the right, you have Victoria Frankenstein, who has the same kind of projected face as the figures in Ministry of Magic. She introduces the monster, the clear protagonist and our protector during this ride, as he walks from behind a curtain and meets the audience.
Lower the lights, quickly. Now. These people are friends.
After capturing all of Universal's other monsters, she's going to demonstrate her control over Dracula, the most formidable monster in the Universal catalog. But Dracula has other plans.
That wasn't us.
Silence, creature.
He crashes the party, the monster freaks out, but Victoria urges us that her experiment will continue. I don't know, just like how this pre-show is scripted, it's just so sick and memorable. I love this line from Victoria when she goes,
"These two just don't get along."
I thought it was a really funny nod to how many times the two monsters have been pitted against each other over the years. There's also a ton of other little details, like how the Frankenstein monster points at himself proudly whenever Victoria praises him, or at the very end of the pre-show you can catch him directing guests into the locker room. Just detail that is so rare in modern attractions. However, the footage that you just saw was not the pre-show that I got. On opening day, at least when I rode, this pre-show was in B mode, which seems like a pretty common thing based on other footage I've seen. It's very similar to Hondo in B mode on Millennium Falcon Smuggler's Run in Galaxy's Edge, where the voiceover is the same, it's just delivered by Hondo on video. One minor criticism I have is when this show is in B mode, there's this huge obvious curtain covering where Victoria is supposed to be. Now I did try to look to the side of the curtain to try to spot the Victoria animatronic. I couldn't see anything, so I don't think she's visible to guests in B mode. And if that's the case, why even have that curtain there at all? Guests probably wouldn't even know that they were missing something in this case, but whatever. I understand this is an extremely niche complaint. And after Victoria tells us about her plans to show the world that she can control Dracula, we're off to put all loose articles in a Universal ride locker. Universal's obsession with ride lockers is something that I really despise, especially on rides that really don't need it, like Men in Black Alien Attack. But I will say there aren't very many rides that need lockers at Epic Universe, and the lockers seem to be much bigger than they are at the other parks. I struggled to fit my standard size backpack in a locker at Hagrid's and Islands of Adventure earlier that vacation, but I fit that and the same amount of stuff that I had inside of a Monsters Unchained locker with relative ease. It also does make sense to have ride lockers for a ride system like Monsters Unchained, where you're tilting and moving all over the place. At this point, I guess I should explain what the ride system for Monsters Unchained actually is. Monsters Unchained has the same kind of Kuko arm vehicle as Harry Potter and the Forbidden Journey, although obviously with some upgrades. These seats have haptic feedback, seemingly have better speakers, and overall just feel like an improvement over Forbidden Journey, and rightfully so. I also found that Monsters Unchained had a larger degree of movement compared to Forbidden Journey. It's really smooth in my opinion, but if you get sick on Forbidden Journey, you will definitely get sick on Monsters Unchained. After loading your stuff in a locker, it's time to approach the load platform, and honestly, even the load platform was really amazing. On Forbidden Journey, there's a single long horizontal conveyor belt for loading and unloading. Universal is very serious about making sure you know exactly your party size, and they load everyone on quickly and hectically so they can maintain maximum ride capacity. Getting on Forbidden Journey feels like a military exercise where you're about to jump out of a fucking plane. It's so rushed and chaotic. Monsters is not like that. Similar to a raft ride, there's a circular load platform with much more time and space to find your vehicle and strap in. Thematically, it also looks like some kind of mad scientist experiment itself. But now, time for the actual ride. The first thing you see is an Igor animatronic, and something about this figure is just so insanely impressive that people don't talk about enough. He shines a flashlight in your face, and weirdly, I think this sells his believability more than anything. I don't think I've ever seen an AA hold an object like that then flashes your eyes. But this was weirdly a genius way to make Igor feel like a real person, and while we have plenty of up-close views of the other monsters, I would kill to see an up-close view of the Igor AA. The next thing you do on your way to meet Victoria is enter the skull-lined catacombs beneath Darkmoor. You see this massive bell ringing back and forth. Your vehicle is rotated perfectly underneath it, and you see this twisted, deformed person is actually acting as the clapper. I thought that even for Universal, this was a pretty disturbing thing to include in your ride, one of the only parts of the ride that I thought was legitimately scary. The reveal is perfect with how the audio syncs up with the bell, the lighting. It's not a jump scare at all either, it's just a really cool, scary reveal. It's very hard to notice this moment on video, so if you've never ridden Monsters Unchained, you probably don't even know it's there. It also didn't hit me until I got off the ride that this is supposed to be Quasimodo from Universal's adaptation of Hunchback of Notre Dame from 1923. Appropriately, the first monster you see on the ride predated any of the monsters you see later on film, so it's a nice nod to Universal's horror legacy. And speaking of horror legacy, you then enter Victoria's lab and see what is my favorite animatronic on the entire ride. This tableau of Phantom of the Opera is just perfect. You hear this haunting organ playing in the background of the ride audio, along with fucking flames shooting out everywhere that are so close you can feel them. You get a hint of his deformed face in the dirty mirror in front of him. Before you switch to the other side, he looks you right in the eyes and reaches for you. He feels so close that you could touch him, and every time I saw this figure, I got goosebumps. And he's not even a part of the rest of the damn ride. The execution of this scene is just perfection and sets the tone for the rest of the attraction. You then see Victoria announce her experiment has begun and that she now has Dracula under my control. The monster replies, he connects the electricity, and you feel the current surge through your ride vehicle. Again, perfectly executed scene. Frankenstein summons Dracula, but he's certainly not under her control. I haven't mentioned how fluid all these animatronics are just because it seemed redundant, but this Dracula animatronic is particularly impressive for how huge he is. The portal effect behind him is also really sick, how it summons his cape, and you're hit with this blast of heat as he escapes. Now, the one part of this ride that sticks out like a sore thumb is right before this scene after seeing Dracula. For like 5 seconds, all riders see is a black curtain with a bunch of chains with a strobe light projection. This is the only corner of the entire attraction that is not immaculately themed. Even on my first ride through, this stuck out to me as incredibly cheap looking in comparison to the rest of the attraction. So why is it here? A few people have speculated that this stretch is where the scene of the Bride of Frankenstein was supposed to be. If you look at the Dark Universe vinyl cover, the bride is included with the other monsters. Now you might just say, oh, well the bride appears in the meet and greet, so it might just have been a reference to that. Okay, I can accept that, but then why the fuck is she in the ride photo portrait? Every other character is drawn as their Monsters Unchained iteration, and the bride's look is an original design that to my knowledge doesn't exist in any other media. Even if you still want to say it's a reference to the meet and greet for some reason, her look in the park is the same as the movie Bride of Frankenstein, as is the monster. Clearly she was supposed to be somewhere in the ride, and seeing how tight the ride script is, I can't imagine she was a major part of the storyline and got cut, and should have probably been more like a one-time cameo, similar to Phantom of the Opera. Personally, I subscribe to this fan theory, if for no other reason that it's really fun and interesting, and some people have further speculated that one day she'll get added back into the attraction as like DLC, but that would be pretty unprecedented to add an entire scene to an attraction that was not there on opening day. But anyway, back to monsters. Dracula then sets the nightmares in Frankenstein's castle free, and we start to see all kinds of demons and mummies escape from their confinement. We then get a quick cameo from Creature from the Black Lagoon as he reaches up towards your ride vehicle, which, you know, gotta have him in there. I kind of wish this scene was a bit more clear, because your vehicle only tilts toward him for like a fraction of a second. I don't even think my dad saw him the first time we went on. I also think they're experimenting with the lighting in this scene, because I recall the creature having a static spotlight shown on him, yet all of the footage I see has him with this strobing effect. I assume the spotlight was to make his reveal more obvious since it's so quick, a lot of people weren't noticing him with the strobe. But on the downside, the strobing effect makes him more fearsome, plus the static light revealed a lot of the show infrastructure around him, so it's a give and take. There was also some speculation online that this creature was supposed to be submerged in water, which kind of makes sense to me, but take that for what you will. After the creature, you then get this reveal of the Wolfman, again, super sick, visceral animatronic. He's eating a fresh corpse before he spots you and growls inches from your face. You get a splash of water during this scene, adding to the intensity, which is cool, but I do have another very minor complaint. So in this scene, as well as the heat that you feel coming off of Dracula earlier, I felt like the timing on these 4D effects was off. In the case of the Wolfman, you get splashed with water before the Wolfman even sees you. At first, I thought I misread the scene and you're supposed to feel a squirt of blood from whatever the Wolfman is biting into. But I saw an interview later that confirmed the Wolfman is supposed to spit in your face, which makes a lot more sense.
The team says these are the most advanced animated figures that it has ever built in an attraction. But bringing them to life does include other special effects for the senses, like the feeling of a werewolf drooling on you.
Every time I rode monsters while I was there, the Wolfman shot water on us before he even looked up, so clearly the timing of the water effect was off by a couple seconds. Again, very niche complaint. From here, the Wolfman stalks you in a scene that severely reminded me of Resident Evil Village. He swipes down at you before our protector, the Frankenstein monster, swoops in to save us. He grabs the Wolfman by the neck, fucking stabs him in the chest with a live wire. It's so sick. I audibly made a noise whenever I saw the scene for the first time because it was so awesome. The monster yells at us to run to safety, and then we hear Dracula enter our thoughts, tempting us by saying, This is another bit of dialogue that I didn't catch on my first ride through, but I think is super interesting. Victoria is a morally gray character. We don't know if she's good or bad, we only know her ambition is to bring back glory to the Frankenstein name. Dracula is usually framed as the bad guy in these monster mashups, so it feels appropriate that he asks us to question who's good or evil in this story. Why are we siding with Victoria, who imprisoned all these monsters, including Dracula, only to demonstrate her control over them? After all, Dracula is only presented as the villain. His only involvement in this whole situation is being captured by Victoria. I understand that this isn't Shakespeare, but it's a layer of narrative complexity that you really don't see on attractions. And it's just one of the many things that make this ride so badass. Victoria pleads with us to ignore Dracula's reasoning as she attempts to lead us to safety. We see a big mummy animatronic, which doesn't seem to be based on any classic rendition of the character, just a generic big guy under Dracula's control. Victoria commands Igor to summon daylight to fight back against the vampire creatures. As sunlight begins to enter the castle, Dracula says, "Do you fear the dark, my friend?" The music starts to swell into a climax as the monster holds up a huge reflector to fight back against Dracula. Once again, perfectly executed dark ride scene. Dracula begins to power up into his final form, I guess, and sees us as his next victim. But before he can charge at us, the monster hits him with a beam of sunlight, weakening him. Dracula recovers, jumps across the broken ceiling towards us, yelling, "You can't hide from me!" And besides the curtain chain scene earlier, we encounter the one and only true non-nitpick blemish of this entire ride. There's this Dracula animatronic, which I think is supposed to be the big climax of the ride, with Dracula in his final form, and he has this huge glowing hole through his chest. What I assume is supposed to happen is Dracula is about to finish us off before Victoria saves us at the last moment by zapping him with a ray of sunlight, which is revealed in the next scene. Unfortunately, this Dracula animatronic did not work when we went, and is notorious for malfunctioning. And even when he does work, his movements are extremely limited, not at all as smooth as any of the other animatronics we've seen, which tells me that even when he is working, it's not with full range of motion. It's a shame because this could have been such a sick finale to this already incredible ride. With this Dracula figure in B mode, or not even really in B mode, just completely not moving, it's really not clear what's supposed to be happening here. The ride just kind of ends with Victoria holding a mirror. But yeah, after that, the ride ends with Igor thanking us for joining them. He gets attacked by bats, which I refuse to accept kill him, and that's Monsters Unchained. Because the park was so dead, there was a team member standing in the corridor between the load and unload who kept asking people if they wanted to get back on and re-ride, which of course I said yes. In total, I rode Monsters Unchained I think like 5 times, and all I could think about in reflecting on my time at Epic was that I should have spent more time riding Monsters Unchained. So as I mentioned, this immediately became my favorite attraction anywhere. On the plane ride home, I downloaded a bunch of ride-throughs of Monsters Unchained, and I just watched them over and over again. And as you could probably tell by my super granular analysis, I fell in love with this ride in a way that I haven't fallen in love with a ride since I was a little kid. The technology speaks for itself, and it nails every single thing that makes themed attractions great. The queue is extremely detailed and builds anticipation for the story. The script is witty and the dialogue delivery is insanely memorable. The scenes are paced perfectly and the music and effects sync almost to perfection. This ride is everything that I love about themed entertainment rolled into one. Now, the big debate for everybody that's been to Epic Universe is, what is better, Monsters or Ministry? Now, you already know what side of the aisle I'm on in that conversation, but even just objectively, I think Monsters just tells a better story. I guess if you're a Harry Potter fan, you'll be more partial to Ministry, but I don't know. The Ministry fans are like the cool, popular, but boring kids in school, whereas the Monsters fans are the weird, goth kids with a ton of personality. I'm sticking with Monsters gang, no question. Monsters Unchained is more than a 10 out of 10. It is undeniably one of the greatest themed attractions on planet Earth. Whew. All right, had to calm down from all that glazing. So after Monsters Unchained, I headed over to Curse of the Werewolf. This was a ride that I'd heard next to nothing about, so I was curious for what to expect. But after riding it, it became very clear why I'd heard nothing about it. Once again, this ride was a complete walk-on, so much so that I don't even think that they were loading full trains. I believe I also did use my Express Pass here, and of course, I skipped absolutely no one. Curse of the Werewolf is actually this pretty unique ride vehicle where you're seated on one side of a spinning coaster. It's kind of hard to explain, but based on the footage you're seeing, I'm sure you get the gist. The ride seemed like it was thrilling enough, although I was more interested in seeing the theming of this coaster. The story was basically a rough retelling of the original Wolfman movie. You enter a gypsy camp and see a bunch of warnings about the full moon and stuff. The highlight of this coaster is the werewolf himself, who I think is supposed to be in like a barn or something, swiping down at the guests as they pass through. When I first heard about this figure, it reminded me a lot of the Yeti in Expedition Everest, so I was super excited to see this kind of figure on a coaster that actually functioned. But unfortunately, I didn't actually get to see this werewolf figure at all. The ride has this kind of unique motion where you fly past the werewolf, the ride fake valleys, you pass through the werewolf in reverse, and then go back through again, similar to what happens in Hiccup Swing Gliders. But the problem is that because of the rotating ride vehicles, you may not get to see the werewolf. If you're seated like I was, my car did not rotate during this valleying part. I knew where the werewolf was supposed to be, I even looked up, and I couldn't see anything. In fact, I've never even seen footage of this werewolf even moving, so perhaps he's just a static figure, which is incredibly lame. The ride's pretty short too. There's the scene at the end where you see who I assume is the gypsy that's central to the movie and this ride, and at first I thought she was supposed to be a moving figure that was just malfunctioning, but I guess she's also just a completely static figure because every other video I've seen is just like this. So did the entire budget just go to Monsters Unchained? Like, this entire ride was very confusing to me. All in all, the best word I could use to describe Curse of the Werewolf is awkward. Typically, a coaster is the centerpiece of a themed land. That title obviously goes to Monsters Unchained in this case, so Curse is going for a more C-ticket vibe. And for that reason, I don't think it's fair to judge it by the same standards as a ride that's going for a home run, like Monsters or Ministry. Even despite the lackluster animatronics or lack thereof, this ride is perfectly fine if the wait time is right. Anything more than 30 minutes and you're going to be disappointed. So that was Darkmoor. There was still a lot of stuff I want to see next time I go, like the restaurants, the drinks looked pretty cool. Like the rest of Epic, it just seems like a really fun place to chill and spend time at. It unironically got me wanting to watch some more classic Universal monster movies I haven't seen before, and I think the reason for that is that Darkmoor captures that kernel of awesomeness that hardcore fans love about those movies. Yes, they're in black and white and show their age, but when you're able to get over that barrier, there's something really sick about a lot of these old school horror movies. Universal somehow identified what that ethereal thing was, captured it, and modernized it for Darkmoor, and I really would love to see hardcore monster fans' reactions to this land being brought to life. So at that point, there was only one land left to conquer, which was Super Nintendo World. Weirdly, this was actually the land I was least looking forward to. Probably because I'd already seen the smaller Hollywood version a year earlier, so I wasn't sure how many surprises would be in store for me. But at the same time, I wanted to see what was new here, what had been expanded upon from the Hollywood version. Leading up to the Nintendo portal, you get this coin fountain that I really loved, very reminiscent of that part of Peach's castle in Mario 64, where the Boo comes out and you enter the scary level. When you enter the Nintendo portal, there's an escalator that you have to go up, which was a little awkward. I think maybe just because they wanted that vertical depth. There's no lower level in Epic, and they wanted people entering the land from above, looking down. Again, this is nitpicky, but I thought the escalator was kind of weird. When you go through the portal, you're hit with this incredible reveal of the Mushroom Kingdom. Once again, the footage speaks for itself and how Universal was able to bring to life these Nintendo elements. Koopas walk back and forth, coins flicker in the distance, those spiky sand things waddle back and forth. It's overwhelming in the best way. I couldn't really get good footage of this, but there's this one ledge with like these AR binoculars where you can do sightseeing and get a good view of the land while also seeing some fun additional elements layered onto what you're seeing through AR. There's also meet and greets with Mario, Luigi, Peach, and Toad, which by now I'm sure you've seen all over social media. The suits are really expressive and blink, adding a lot to the authenticity of these characters. Hollywood also added a Yoshi meet and greet to their Nintendo world, so hopefully that makes its way to the East Coast someday soon. There's a very important element to Super Nintendo World that I unfortunately did not get to participate in, which was the power-up band. Essentially, it's this peripheral you can use to interact with these video gamey challenges throughout the Mushroom Kingdom and Donkey Kong Country. It reminded me a lot of Magi Quest, shout out if you know what that is, where you have to like hit a bongo drum the right way to summon a rhino or do some other timing challenges to kill a Koopa or something. Your progress is tracked in a companion app which also integrates with the Mario Kart ride. It seems like a lot of fun to get lost in Super Nintendo World and play with this band, but the downside is most guests are going to have to make the decision between having fun with the power-up band or seeing the rest of the park. If you only have one day at Epic Universe and you want to see everything, I do not recommend getting the power-up band or the Harry Potter wand for that matter. These probably add a lot to their respective lands if you use them, but on a normal operating day, even if you're there from rope drop to close, I don't believe you'll have the time to do these add-ons and every ride, or at the very least, you'll feel super rushed while you do them, which probably ruins the experience. While I didn't eat anything at Super Nintendo World on this trip, I did eat at Toad's Cafe on my trip to Hollywood a year earlier, and I remember my food from there being very not good. The theming of the food was really cool, and I kept my little Mario hat skewer, but yeah, very much glorified counter food. But obviously that's not this coast, so take that information how you will. Our first ride at Super Nintendo World was Yoshi's Adventure, and this was weirdly a ride I was really looking forward to. Vibe rides are slow-moving attractions that give you an overview of a themed land. Think stuff like the People Mover, Skyway Buckets, the monorail, etc. If there was ever a land in a Universal Park deserving of a vibe ride, it was Super Nintendo World, as you get up close with all the different elements you see from the ground level. The premise of the ride is you board your own colored Yoshi as you try to find 3 different eggs, and hitting the button that corresponds with each. Honestly, this ride would have been cool without this gimmick, but it's Nintendo, so they gotta do some kind of video gamey thing. This might be a weird pull, but Yoshi's Adventure reminded me a lot of Pokemon Snap, where you're in the slow vehicle, see these scripted tableaus in front of you, hoping to capture some eggs, as well as the elusive golden egg. The music on the ride is the Yoshi theme. In some ways, the obvious necessary pick, in other ways, the perfect creative decision to make the ride feel authentic. I also love the indoor scenes featuring Baby Mario and the other baby characters. Other than that, there's really not that much to say. I guess one minor negative is the queue is extremely long. Like most lands that day, there was no wait, but it took like 5 minutes just to walk to the load platform. There was also some annoying stairs to climb up to get to the second level. Again, a recurring theme with Epic Universe for some reason. But yeah, overall, just a super pleasant experience. I don't think enough people are talking about this ride. Our next stop was Mario Kart Bowser's Challenge, and this was a ride I'd fully intended to skip as I'd already done it in Hollywood, but since like everything else it was a walk-on, I decided to try it out. Mario Kart Bowser's Challenge is one of the most polarizing attractions I can think of in recent memory. Personally, I really liked it, but I'll also explain what makes it so divisive. I think the main reason people have issues with it is their expectation of what a Mario Kart ride should be. Understandably, most people's idea of a Mario Kart ride would be you riding at high speeds in a kart, shooting items at people, or at the very least controlling your car in some kind of race that you can tangibly affect the outcome of. The problem with that idea is that it's not feasible for a modern theme park attraction, especially one as popular as Mario Kart would be. For one, a go-kart experience is extremely low capacity. Let's just assume that you have 8 people on a single track. Let's just say the entire experience of the ride from the race to loading and unloading takes 10 minutes. At that point, you're looking at 48 people an hour who would get to ride this ride. That is just not acceptable for a modern theme park attraction, not to mention the gigantic footprint a ride like that would take up. Universal had to go a different conceptual direction with this ride, and the answer ended up being a dark ride with some video gamey elements. While you're not racing against anyone for time in Bowser's Challenge, you are competing against Team Bowser in some way. The goal is to collect coins, and you get them by either shooting Team Bowser with turtle shells or by turning the wheel of your car when prompted in what is essentially a quick time event. From my understanding, all the movements of your car are pre-programmed, but the timing does a good job of tricking your mind into believing that you're steering the car. One thing I love about Bowser's Challenge is that you can actually lose. Like the rest of Nintendo Land, your progress can be tracked in the companion app, and if you win the game, or win the ride I guess, you're rewarded with the Universal Cup, which can be obtainable in said app, or purchasable in the Mario Kart gift shop for a nominal fee. The other important element of this ride is the AR goggles, which project the other kart racers and other ride elements onto what you're seeing. To aim your Koopa shells, you just have to look at what you're going to shoot at and shoot. What's really cool about these AR goggles is all of these AR elements are in fixed positions on the ride, meaning if you tilt your head upwards, the other racers don't also float up as well, and they stay on the ground. This helps connect the virtual and real show, and I feel like people who are prone to motion sickness would probably not have an issue with Bowser's Challenge for this reason. Personally, I really love this headset. I felt like I was using a new Nintendo peripheral for the first time. I also loved how they designed the goggles to speed up the loading process. Rather than having guests not put on the headset until they get to their ride vehicle, which would take several minutes to make sure they're securely fastened, make sure their headset's on tight, etc., guests are given the frame of the goggles after the pre-show. This gives them time to put the head strap on, make sure it's comfortable, and then all you have to do when they get to the vehicle is put on the lenses, which magnetically attach to the visors. It's really smart engineering that feels right at home with the quality design that Nintendo is known for. Now onto the actual ride. The queue for Bowser's Challenge, like most of the queues at Epic, is an attraction in and of itself, and some haters have said it's better than the actual ride. There are all kinds of fun references to Mario characters, iconic elements of Nintendo games brought to life. There was a Paper Mario diorama. It's just full of fun stuff to look at. The stone Bowser statue is a sight to behold, and you will fill up your camera roll with like 100 pictures minimum the first time you step foot in here. I also loved the pre-show where it explains how the ride works. There's flashing instructions on the monitors with zero narration, just cute caricatures, which is so authentically Nintendo, I couldn't take it. After the last pre-show, you get your sick Mario headset and go to your vehicle. As for the ride itself, I think it does an awesome job of mixing real and digital elements. You begin the ride at the starting line with plenty of Nintendo onlookers, including a Lakitu holding the starting lights, again completely authentic to Mario Kart. You start on the Bowser's Castle stage, obviously, and thanks to wind effects and what you're seeing in your visor, your brain gets tricked into thinking you're going faster than you actually are. In the next scene, you see a physical chain chomp in some kind of level 1 Mushroom Kingdom track. You then move to a room full of pipes and piranha plants, again, each room feeling like a different track with a different vibe. Next is an underwater level featuring that creepy ass eel from Mario 64. In the following room, you get like a Boo's Mansion track with swinging chandeliers and creepy music. Then there's an air level with all this wind and thunderstorms, followed by Bowser's airship. You come face to face with Lava Bowser, who I guess is kind of like a boss. Since he's a giant target, you can farm for late game coins. You then get a star, which was really sick. You get the star theme, and you're magically transported to the most iconic track in Mario Kart history, Rainbow Road. You just know they had to throw that track in somewhere, and I love how they brought it to life. You then burst through the smoke, make it to the finish line, and see if you won. I also loved the music at the end of this ride. I don't know if this is borrowed from a game, but if it's an original track, it sounds just like any other end of race track from any Mario Kart game. So yeah, that's Mario Kart Bowser's Challenge. If you're a Mario Kart fan, you're either gonna love or hate this ride, and as someone who would not identify as a Nintendo fan myself, I really enjoyed it, and I thought it did a great job of capturing the Nintendo vibe. I thought how they worked through a lot of the technical barriers of this ride was smart, and as I mentioned earlier, they did the best job they realistically could in bringing a Mario Kart ride to life. I've seen a lot of people dog the AR technology as an over-reliance on digital versus physical, but this is not a ride where it completely replaces physical sets. The digital effects, including the AR goggles, work in tandem with physical theming, not to mention the ride would be much less interesting and less authentic to Nintendo if there was only physical sets and no interactivity. And even if you're not interested in the ride or know the AR stuff is going to make you sick, if you're a Nintendo fan, I would at least walk through the queue, because like I said, even the biggest haters of this ride will admit that the queue is amazing. And after stepping off of Mario Kart, it was time to finish out Super Nintendo World with the land I knew almost nothing about, Donkey Kong Country. And at last, the final land of the evening was Donkey Kong Country, the companion land to the Mushroom Kingdom, making its first debut in the United States. In total, there are 3 iterations of Super Nintendo World. Universal Studios Hollywood has the smallest, as there's the least amount of space, and only contains the Mario Kart ride. Universal Studios Japan was the first iteration, and it contains everything that's an Epic universe. While it's been a few years since Super Nintendo World has opened in Japan, Donkey Kong Country was only recently added as an expansion. Epic Universe opens with everything released so far. So how does this latest Nintendo expansion compare? Donkey Kong Country is, I know I say this with every single land, immaculately themed. There's tons of personality and touches that come together and make it feel authentic. But in some ways that goes too far. For example, you hear the Donkey Kong Country theme song constantly throughout the land. You know, the like, it's one thing to keep that song on a loop for a level that you might be playing for like 5 to 10 minutes, but when you have it on loop for a theme park land that you might be in for like 60 to 90 minutes, having that song on loop is torture. Like, if you don't want to go on the Donkey Kong coaster and you just wait outside for your friends, you might honestly want to consider leaving Super Nintendo World just because listening to that song will get so grating. One blemish on the land, at least for right now, is that Donkey Kong Country borders what is apparently an empty expansion plot for Epic Universe. As a result, there's this weird painted wall with like push doors across the bottom, presumably connecting the land to this backstage construction area. While riding, you can clearly see this area from the Donkey Kong coaster. And to me, this is the only spot in the entire park that just reeks of cheapness. I don't know, you might say I'm nitpicking, but the entire time I was in the land, I kept noticing this shitty wall. I hope whenever this expansion happens, they do something nice with this area. This land also sports a Donkey Kong meet and greet. I did not see Donkey Kong at all, but the first time I saw a picture of him online whenever he was revealed, I really wanted him to punch me. I will say the Epic Donkey Kong is a major downgrade over the Japanese one for some reason. The fur looks super cheap on the Epic one, like an actual gorilla's fur, and I don't know why this decision was made, but I don't like it. Just like the Mushroom Kingdom, there are some interactive areas with the power-up bands. I didn't notice a ton of these areas, but I was watching this like Donkey Konga minigame where you have to, I think, hit the drum to the beat to summon this rhino thing. I'm sure if you're a hardcore Nintendo fan, you could spend probably half a day completing all these power-up band challenges in both lands. In terms of food, there were a few options like this DK barrel float that I did not try but was pretty popular online. Overall, this land feels, I don't want to say tacked on, but it definitely feels like a DLC to Super Nintendo World, and perhaps rightfully so. It's deceptively small, so it's best not to look at it as a land in its own right, but an expansion to Super Nintendo World. An expansion pack, if you will. But before we finish talking about Super Nintendo World, there's still the centerpiece of Donkey Kong Country, which is Minecart Madness. The premise of this ride is to bring to life the iconic minecart levels from the Donkey Kong Country games. Obviously, the broken tracks that Donkey Kong hops aren't up to theme park safety standards, so the coaster actually uses this unique ride system. There's a fake thematic track that guests see in front of them, but the ride vehicle is actually tethered to the side, which controls the car's actual movements. When I first saw this technology demoed, I thought the side mechanism was going to be really obvious while you're riding, and the jumping illusion would only work for guests on the ground watching the coaster. But honestly, I didn't notice the side mechanism at all when I rode it, and Universal does a great job of tricking you into believing that the track that you're seeing in front of you is what you're actually riding on. The plot is, well, it's about as thick as a standard Donkey Kong level. I think you're supposed to be collecting like a golden banana or something, but stories aren't that important in Nintendo games. You kind of just go on this ride to see cool Donkey Kong shit. This ride does not accept Express Pass due to its popularity and how slow loading it is, but like most rides from that day, I bypassed the entire queue and walked right on. I did get a cool glimpse of the Cranky figure in the queue that I wish I'd gotten to spend more time with. That was really cool. Other than that, I really didn't see a whole lot of noteworthy stuff in the queue. As for the actual ride, my biggest impression was that it is very rough. There's so much cool stuff to talk about on this ride, and I will, but it all just gets overshadowed by how insanely rough this ride is. Every time there's a track brace, you have to like brace yourself for how jerky it's going to be. And while I'm sure there's supposed to be a little bit of a jerk, it's a huge jerk and is a lot more painful than it probably was meant to be. This ride was notoriously shut down for a lot of the soft openings, and so I wonder if maybe that was what they were trying to tone down, but that's just pure speculation on my part. The ride starts by passing Dixie Kong with a view of that empty lot I mentioned earlier. Again, I know I'm nitpicking here, but it is a little distracting to see this lot of construction in a view that could have easily been obstructed by some tall foliage. The plants are going to grow, but in its current state, yeah, it's pretty distracting. You then launch out of a barrel, obviously, and to me, this was the coolest effect on the entire ride. The idea is that you're doing that Nintendo thing where your log goes pew, and then it lands. With the sound effects and everything, they sold this effect perfectly. Next, there's this cool jump scare with Diddy and Donkey Kong almost colliding with your car. You then approach a lift hill and this pig in a barrel who I unreasonably f***ing loved. I don't even think he's a named Donkey Kong character, he just seems like a random rareware animal, which is something that makes this feel extremely authentic to the games. You pass this little tribal mask guy, and suddenly the car starts going crazy. You get some great views of the Monkey Temple, some more back-breaking track switches, and a water splashdown, Matterhorn style. In the final room of the ride, you see Donkey Kong slap a button revealing the golden banana for Diddy. Once again, this feels just like the final cutscene in a level, which just nails that video game vibe perfectly. Now, taking all this into account, the sad reality is all of this is completely overshadowed by the insane jerkiness I mentioned earlier. The theming of this ride is phenomenal, and there were so many tiny creative decisions that really nailed the video game vibe. There are some fun thrills as you're careening through the temple, the animatronics, while basic, look great, and you get some awesome views of the entire land. But on my second ride through, bracing myself for all the violent jerking was all I could think about. I understand this is a novel ride system, so I hope through various refurbishments the intensity of these movements can get toned down, because otherwise this ride is damn near perfect. And with that, I was basically done with Epic. There was one more ride that I hadn't tried yet, which was Constellation Carousel, which is just a carousel. Honestly, I wasn't even sure if I was going to get to ride it or not, but since the Constellation Carousel is right next to where the water show is going to be, I thought I would time my ride with that show, maybe get some cool views of whatever is happening. Now, the nighttime show was another piece of drama on opening day. The day before at media previews, there was this massive fireworks display, which everyone said was incredible, and a lot of people hoped that Universal would repeat this show for the normal people, not just the VIPs. As the night went on, people kept gathering to get a good spot for the fountains, and I was worried I was missing something, because there was no official mention of any type of nighttime show. There were rumors all day long that the previous day's fireworks display was going to be repeated, and while some team members told guests that there weren't going to be any fireworks at all, others were kind of vague and being like, oh, there might be something. But whatever was happening, I figured the carousel would give me a cool view of whatever that was. I think this was the only ride of the entire day where I was able to use my Express Pass for its intended purpose. I skipped a 25-minute line of people to ride a carousel at the end of the day, which one might say is worth even more than the $260 that I actually paid for the pass. As for a review of the ride, it is a carousel. End of review. No, but seriously, I have no idea how you would even review a carousel, but it's about as cool as a carousel could be. There's a ton of cool lighting effects in the ceiling and on the floor, so I highly recommend doing this at night. As for the fountain show that we got on opening day, it was nothing special. I believe it's just the standard fountain show that they do at the end of every night. I don't think that I could recommend timing riding Constellation Carousel with the fountain show unless you've already seen the fountain show. The show's audio was pumped into the carousel, so I kind of could tell what was happening, but yeah, definitely not the intended viewing experience. And after getting off of the carousel a little after 10 p.m., my extremely long day at Epic Universe was finally over. However, the day did not end without one more debacle. So do you remember what I said about Universal catching shit because they had sold out of the day one medallions because they sold them to all of the VIPs the day before? So on the way out, they handed every single guest this envelope. Now, what was inside this envelope is a physical grand opening ticket. Pretty cool. And then this piece of paper, which is a code to a digital day one medallion. If you look at the fine print on this piece of paper, it says that it's non-transferable. And after some thinking, it's when I realized that this digital medallion is a fucking NFT. Now, I am dying to know the timeline of all of this because I want to know how far in advance was this planned? Like, did they know they were going to sell out of day one medallions because they sold them to the VIPs and so they created all of these NFTs just to appease people? Or did they realize that they fucked up and scrambled to do all this on opening day to make it up for people? Like, is it that easy to print off all these pieces of paper and generate all of those NFTs in like 12 hours? I mean, I guess it seems possible. But at the same time, I don't know how they would come up with this scheme, decide they're going to create NFTs, print all of these high quality pieces of paper off, and give them out to people. And if this truly was pre-planned and they knew how bad they were going to piss people off by selling all of the day one medallions before day one, that makes it even more fucked up. And speaking of fuck up, Universal couldn't even hand out these without screwing that up as well. Because I guess Universal forgot that Epic Universe has 2 exits, so they only handed out these tickets and NFTs at the main exit. So if you were staying at Grand Helios paying all that money, you didn't even know this was happening. And all this was just a completely unforced error that Universal committed because they wanted to appease their VIPs. And then the final wrinkle of this entire ordeal, Universal launched a pre-sale for the day one medallion, I guess to make up for it again. But I gotta ask, what is the point of buying a day one medallion if anyone can purchase it and you didn't get it on day one? I mean, maybe if you had to confirm if you were there, like that would at least make it more special. But if anyone could buy this day one medallion and you didn't get it on day one, it's just a medallion. But I digress. So let's review some first impressions of the park. My first takeaway from opening day was that the park was completely dead. Did Universal anticipate low crowds? Was this all part of their plan? Were they caught off guard? What the hell happened? I've heard conflicting anecdotal theories about what happened on opening day, but the running theory is that Universal anticipated way more guests than actually showed up. Now, I did somewhat predict this, as I mentioned earlier in the video, with the reverse psychology effect with theme park openings, where everyone assumes it's going to be completely crowded so no one shows up. But that didn't really happen here because Universal had sold out of all the tickets that they put up for opening day. That would mean that Epic was likely going to be at capacity unless Universal capped attendance to either offer a premier experience to drive word of mouth or to help ease staff into park operations. Not to mention, they charged $260 for Express Pass, I think double the going rate for IOA or Studios, indicating that this was going to be a valuable Express Pass that was going to skip large crowds. But obviously that didn't happen, so did Universal know the crowds were going to be dead? My theory is no, and here's why. First of all, when I rope dropped Ministry, only about a third of the stanchions they put out to control crowds ended up getting used, indicating they expected many more people. Also, just anecdotally, I'd heard that team members were told to expect mayhem on opening day, and obviously that did not happen. As for why the day showed sold out, it's possible that those who purchased a 3 or 4 day ticket package to go to Epic on opening day ended up saving their ticket until the weekend. Now, I find it very dumb that someone that was able to buy a ticket for the opening of a theme park would rather go on a random Friday or Saturday instead, but apparently those people exist. There may also exist a bunch of people who bought a ticket to opening day that decided to not go at all, which seems even more unlikely. The other theory I heard, which seems even more unbelievable, is that Universal had capped ticket sales, let's just say at 17,000 people. But someone along the line screwed up and the ticket sales were actually capped at 11,000 people instead of 17,000, and somehow nobody noticed until opening day. I find this very unlikely just because I'm sure every single facet of Epic Universe was excruciatingly examined leading up to opening day, especially attendance. But I guess stranger things have happened. So why was the park dead? I don't know, but I do know for sure that Universal sold me an Express Pass that cost $260 that I'm almost certain they knew was going to be useless. I did call Universal and politely ask for a refund because, again, they would have known what the attendance was going to be that day and that $260 Express Pass would be completely useless, but they said no. So there's that. My second takeaway, which I've seen confirmed as the months have gone on since the opening, was that Epic Universe really struggles in inclement weather. The day I went was pretty damn hot, maybe not the middle of the summer Florida hot, but it was pretty oppressive until the clouds came out later in the day. There is very little shade at the park, particularly at Berk, so it's easy to get worn down on hot days, especially considering the only water ride is Fire Drill. But I also could not imagine how miserable this park would be in the notorious Florida rain. When it rains, 8 out of the 11 rides at Epic shut down, meaning the park capacity cripples. I've heard that rainy days at Epic are absolutely miserable, so if you bought one of these ticket packages and the day that you chose for Epic just happens to get rained out, you are shit out of luck. You cannot just choose to go back another day. Obviously, open air rides are more sightly, but the lack of indoor options for Florida's extremely common rainstorms seems like a huge oversight. Florida's rain problem is actually something that Imagineers designing Walt Disney World factored in when translating their rides from Disneyland and Anaheim. A good number of their attractions were brought indoors, or at least the queues were, specifically to help deal with the Florida rain. With that in mind, Epic feels like a park designed for the picturesque climate of Southern California, not for the storms which are frequent in Florida year-round. To be fair, between all 7 primary Disney and Universal parks in Florida, some handle rain better than others. Magic Kingdom has plenty of indoor experiences, so you still have a good amount of entertainment options on those crappy days. Epic is not nearly as old as Magic Kingdom, so while you can't expect as many ride options, you would certainly expect more rainproof attractions to be a necessity in a state-of-the-art park like Epic Universe. Lastly, I want to talk about what Epic Universe means for the larger theme park industry as a whole. There's been a lot of conversation in theme park circles about if Disney should be concerned about responding to Epic Universe, and a lot of people who I respect have bemoaned the idea of comparing the 2 resorts. However, I strongly disagree with that. I think that these kind of conversations are healthy, and we as consumers win whenever they happen. The golden era of Disney theme parks, and perhaps the entire themed entertainment industry in America, is the Eisner era. Michael Eisner made aggressive moves in the 80s and 90s to assert Disney's cultural dominance, and as a result, we got some of the most memorable movies and rides in the company's history. One of his key strategies was, frankly, copying the competition. Disney Springs, aka Downtown Disney, aka Pleasure Island, was an attempt to copy the adult nightlife scene of Church Street Station. MGM Studios was a clear attempt to copy the success of Universal. Animal Kingdom was an attempt to copy the success of Busch Gardens. Disney wouldn't be the company it is today without these moves, and they came from responding to others' success. Not to mention, just in general, whenever companies compete, we as the consumers win. As I mentioned earlier, the anti-consumerism of the Chapek era communicated that guests were lucky to have the parks back at all, and if they wanted to go, it was going to be on Disney's terms, no matter how difficult that was going to be. Isn't it refreshing to have these companies actually compete with our business? So why are we poo-pooing the idea of directly comparing them and wanting them to compete with one another? While Epic is obviously young and its impact on the theme park industry will not be felt overnight, I think it's happening sooner than most people realize. I've had multiple, I guess you could call normies, who aren't into theme parks, who have no interest in going to Disney, but really want to go to Universal Studios, see all the Harry Potter stuff, and see Epic Universe. Now, obviously, that's just my anecdotal evidence of what I see, but I don't recall ever having these many conversations previously, and it's those people who Disney should really be worried about, not the 0.1% of hardcore fans. In the past, I feel like most trips to the Orlando theme parks was some combination of 4 days at Disney World and 2 days at Universal, with the obvious choice being to stay on property at Disney World, the place you'd be spending the most time. But now, that decision is not as clear-cut. Families have to make the decision of taking their kids to see the parks with Encanto and Coco, or the parks with Harry Potter, Nintendo, and the Minions. And that decision is not as easy as Disney homers like to pretend that it is. After Epic Universe opened, Disney World President Jeff Volley gave his well wishes to Epic Universe, saying what's good for Florida tourism is good for everyone. And while that is a kind gesture, Disney would be very dumb to rest on their laurels. In my opinion, Disney is not doing enough in Orlando to excite the general public. A majority of their projects over the next few years aren't brand new rides or lands, but updates or rethemes. And even when these projects are well executed, they just don't excite people like something brand new built from the ground up. The biggest response Disney has is a brand new Villains Land in Magic Kingdom, seemingly a direct counter to Dark Universe. This land will mostly be a brand new addition to park capacity, so if any of Disney's new projects will have that same kind of exciting flair as Epic, this is going to be it. The other projects on the horizon seemingly timed to compete with Epic include the Monsters Inc. land replacing Muppets Courtyard and the remainder of the old Backlot Tour, the South America expansion of Animal Kingdom replacing Dinoland USA, and a Cars Land also in Magic Kingdom, which is replacing the iconic Frontierland riverboat. Unlike Villains Land, these experiences all largely replace prior, often beloved experiences. And while I'm sure these will be big deals when they open, how well will they be executed and how long will the public care? If Universal gains the ground that I think they will with this new park, the only way Disney is going to retain their dominance is by doing what people have been asking about since 1998. Building a 5th park. And I'm almost positive I know exactly what that park's going to be, but that's a subject for a whole other video. So it's taken me a long time to finish this video, and a majority of it was shot about 6 months ago, but since then I've actually made a second trip back to Epic. And since it's been about 6 months since Epic's opening, I thought I would do a State of the Union for the current state of the park. I'm obviously not going to recount my entire trip at Epic, but here are some basic impressions. On the positive side, in my initial recording, I forgot to mention how genius a lot of the logistical decisions were in Epic's design. Like, for example, I went with my friends this time, and by the point in our trip when we had to go to Epic, we were so sick of dragging around our stuff, shoving it in a tiny ride locker, and then having to leave it for like an hour at a time. With Epic, not only are the lockers bigger, but they're at the very end before the actual loading of the ride, so you can still stay with your phone and all of your stuff for a majority of the line. I was also able to try some new food. We ate at the Blue Dragon restaurant, and I really loved the Pan-Asian fusion. The theming was really cool, the staff were really nice, and I had the best calamari of my life that I got as an appetizer that I wished I would have eaten as my main dish. We were there until park closed, and rather than walking all the way to the front of the park where Blue Dragon is in the back, we instead left through Grand Helios, so I got to check that out for about 5 minutes. And this is my sneaky tip for Epic Universe. If it's the end of the day and you don't feel like dealing with all the people waiting for their Ubers at the front of the park, leave through Grand Helios. You don't have to be staying there, and there was nobody waiting for their Ubers at Grand Helios. So this is a secret hack if you don't feel like being around everyone else waiting for the ride. I wouldn't say I got to explore Grand Helios, but I did notice it was shockingly thin. Like, you walk 15 steps from the entrance and you're already on the other side of the hotel. Not a negative or a positive, just a thought. But now for the not so good. I want to start off by talking about what most people would care about, not just theme park nerds like myself. The price for Epic right now is a problem, and it's very high relative to what you get when compared to other theme parks for the same amount of money. Now, the first time that I went, I really didn't think about the cost of it at all. Not that I'm rich by any means, but I was like, I'm gonna go to Epic on opening day. The cost of Epic is the cost of Epic. And really, if you don't think about how much money you're spending for your tickets, Epic is great. But I watched this YouTube video that I recommend that really kind of put things into perspective in terms of the cost of Epic Universe. The price for Epic is similar to Magic Kingdom, which doesn't sound that crazy at first because Epic is a brand new park, right? But unlike Epic, Magic Kingdom has, like, I think close to double the amount of rides and many more experiences that are still available when it rains. Compare that to Epic, which, like I just mentioned, only has 3 completely covered rides whenever it rains. I believe that the price of food and merch is pretty comparable, but Epic is actually the lowest rated park on TripAdvisor among any of the Disney or Universal parks around the world, ranking even lower than Six Flags parks at a whopping 2.1 out of 5 stars on TripAdvisor. Once again, I highly recommend this video by Pandy Travels for more information on why this is happening. But essentially, the cost of Epic is not justified with the current guest experience, no matter how cutting edge it might be. That being said, if you just buy your ticket without thinking about the cost too much, then Epic is still pretty great. Now, my second negative was my experience with Ministry, because I did something that I swore I would never do ever again. Now, we had somebody in our group who was a big Harry Potter fan, and also I just wanted my friends to experience Ministry because it's such a tentpole attraction at the park. It would be a shame to miss out on it. So we endeavored to get in line for a posted 4-hour wait for Ministry. Now, I doubted the accuracy of that based on the size of the line, and I was kind of right because we only ended up waiting 3.5 hours. So once again, I've spent way more of my lifetime in that stupid Ministry queue than I've ever planned on. The biggest reason for this insane wait is that Ministry is now accepting Express Pass, which cripples the standby line. Essentially, whenever you have an express lane and a standby lane, there's a ratio of express guests that you allow and adjust based on how many people are in the standby line. This way, you keep the express lane express for the people that paid all that money, which again, I don't think the price has gone down much from the $210 that I paid on opening day, if it's gone down at all. But the problem with adding this to Ministry is that it's still overwhelmingly popular, and with not that many other experiences in the park right now, it was just way too early in its life to be added to Express. Express Pass was added to Ministry 3 months to the day from opening day. By comparison, Hagrid Pirates at IOA, which has consistently been the hottest ride at that park since it opened, did not get Express Pass added until 6 years into its lifetime. Interestingly, this was a week after Epic Universe opened and 3 months before Ministry being given Express, which correlates to some kind of connection where Universal is willing to now let the day guests suffer in horrendous lines for an in-demand attraction as long as it sells more Express Passes. But what do I know? But by far, the biggest disappointment of my entire trip was Monsters Unchained. Now, you already know how much I love Monsters Unchained. It's my favorite ride anywhere in the world, and I was super excited to share it with my friends because of how mind-blowing it was the first time I rode it. And while I figured it wouldn't be as mind-blowing because, again, it was an opening day and various wear and tear would probably be put on the ride, I realized that Monsters has been given some seemingly permanent downgrades that really have me scared for the future of this attraction and all of Dark Universe. So Monsters Unchained has an insanely efficient ride system. It was the first attraction to cross 1 million riders at Epic, and as a result has a consistently low wait. But the wait time for this ride is too low for an e-ticket attraction, as in way below what I think anyone, including Universal, would expect or want. Now, this has turned into like a mini nerd conspiracy where there's a bunch of Monsters fans who are like, oh no, there's nothing wrong with the ride. It's just so insanely efficient. It's the most efficient ride in the world. There's no problems with this ride right now. But as someone who became insanely obsessed with Monsters Unchained since I first rode it, let me tell you, there are a lot of signs that us monster heads should be concerned, because having an e-ticket ride with this low of a wait consistently is not good. Now, whenever you try bringing this up to these monster heads, they always say, oh, you don't get it. The ride is just so efficient. That's why it only has like a 10-20 minute wait most of the time. Okay, let's analyze this. According to ThrilledData.com, the average wait time for the entire life of this attraction from opening day is 28 minutes. By comparison, the average wait time for two other e-ticket attractions at Epic, Ministry and Donkey Kong, are 131 minutes and 108 minutes respectively. Now, the monster lovers would say to that, oh, well, they're two completely different ride systems. It's not fair to compare the capacities. And okay, there's some truth to that, but let's look at a much more apt comparison, Forbidden Journey at IOA. Now, this is effectively the same exact ride system as Monsters Unchained. It's also a ride that opened in 2010. Now, we're not even talking about whenever the attraction first opened. The earliest data we have at Thrill Data goes back to 2019. And since that point, the average wait time for Harry Potter was 38 minutes. Now, mind you, it's been well over a decade since that attraction opened, and it still has a higher average wait time than Monsters. And once again, these pro Monsters people will say, oh, well, you just don't get it. Like, it's so much more efficient than the Harry Potter system. Like, it's just so efficient. Like, that's all they keep saying. And they never can articulate what's so efficient about it. I mean, just looking at the load stations, I can't imagine their capacities are that different. While we don't have hard data on this, anybody who went to IOA during that time period can attest that Forbidden Journey was one of the hardest attractions to get on for years. So I think it's clear, at least it is to me, that the popularity of Monsters Unchained is below expectations. But you might be asking, why is that a bad thing? And why did that make it one of my biggest bummers of the trip? Well, the answer is because it is now affecting the show. A couple months ago, I started seeing random tweets about how Monsters Unchained is now skipping the entire pre-show. And so I thought to myself, that's really not good. The pre-shows are very critical to setting up the story and explaining what's going on. I imagine this is due to some kind of animatronic downtime or whatever, and Epic's going to fix whatever caused this pre-show debacle. But then there were a lot of concerned nerds such as myself who inquired with team members about what was happening, and we were told that it was because they were having issues with the monster animatronic. Now, on opening day, I did see a B mode for the second pre-show room when the Victoria AA was malfunctioning. And this is common in modern theme park attractions as a way to still give people the context of a pre-show when not everything's working perfectly. So then do they really not have a B mode for when the monster isn't working? But okay, let's just say it was an oversight and they fucked up and they only made a B mode for Victoria and they totally forgot about a B mode for the monster. But then my next question is, what the hell does a malfunctioning Frankenstein AA have to do with the Igor pre-show? Because that's getting skipped too. The Igor pre-show is just a video, seemingly designed to be downtime proof. Even if the little catacomb navigation unit doesn't work, the pre-show still makes just as much sense. So unless like the TV is down, there's no mechanical reason why that show wouldn't be running, but it gets skipped all the time, and it has absolutely nothing to do with any of the AAs in the second room. Now, if you want to try to say that they skipped the first pre-show because if the second one isn't working, then the story doesn't make any sense without the second one, that's not true, because at the end of the first pre-show, Igor says,
"The doctor will see you now."
It's deliberately written to make sense even if the second pre-show is skipped, because rather than meeting you in that room, Victoria is just going to meet you in her lab on the ride. And even if you want to try to say that that still doesn't make sense, well, it still makes a fuck of a lot more sense than completely skipping both pre-shows altogether. Now, it might seem like I'm getting upset over people that don't exist, but I promise you that they do, and it just really irritates me whenever people try to pee on you and tell you it's raining, especially when it comes to theme parks. So all that background context to say that whenever we did Monsters, we waited until nighttime, not right before park closed. I want to say it was like 8 p.m., just so it was dark out and the mood was right whenever we went on Monsters. Of course, the ride was a walk-on, and my biggest fear was realized whenever we were shooed from the Igor pre-show and the second pre-show room into the lockers, and my friends did not get to see the pre-show and understand what the hell was happening on this attraction. And once again, after we got off the ride, we were invited to re-ride the ride multiple times, and they did tell me they enjoyed the ride, but I just know that they didn't enjoy it as much as they could have had they not been robbed of the full Monsters Unchained experience. So why is Universal doing this if there's no issue with the actual animatronics? Well, the reason is to keep up capacity. In operations, success is determined by how many riders get to experience the ride, usually based on a per hour count. This is part of why Forbidden Journey cast members are so serious about making sure people had their stuff together before getting onto the load platform, because if a vehicle went without riders, that was lost capacity. If Monsters held people up for 2 pre-shows, which take about 10 minutes combined to get people in and out, you'd then be cutting off people from getting on the ride, they'd be sending a bunch of empty trains, and the standby line would back up unnecessarily. In a way, it does make sense, because more people getting to ride a ride is good, but it also feels kind of gross because it's getting into the territory of attractions just being rides and nothing else, and that couldn't be further from the truth. And getting back to the annoying people who try to say that, oh, the reason this is happening is just because of capacity and nothing else, I highly doubt that all of the Universal creative team members who worked so hard on this ride's story, the queue, the setup, everything, anticipated the capacity being so good that hundreds of people would just completely skip over that entire story, not getting any of it before just walking on the attraction. Not having these pre-shows absolutely kills the readability of this attraction, and whenever you read what a lot of them have to say about the story and the layers that you don't pick up until you ride this ride like 30-40 times, and how the lore of this ride goes back to like some Horror Nights houses from years back, it's just all of this is completely wasted when people skip the pre-shows because they're hurting capacity if they don't. I would argue that this ride has the most layered story of any attraction anywhere in the world, and if you truly think that Universal was willing to skip all of that and that this was all part of their vision for the future of this ride, then you're a moron. And no, malfunctioning AAs have absolutely nothing to do with whatever's happening. So TLDR, Monsters was subpar. It's already getting its show cut as if it's a 15-year-old ride on the chopping block about to be demoed. And whenever the first land replacement happens at Epic Universe in like the next 20 years, there's not a doubt in my mind that Dark Universe is going to be the first to go. Now, based on that rant, it probably sounds like I hated my time at Epic, but I really enjoyed it, honestly. I just don't think the Epic effect has fully taken hold just yet. In a recent earnings call, Disney reported that Epic had even less of an effect than predicted on its bottom line, and shortly after Epic opened, Comcast reported that Epic was performing, quote, in line with expectations, which to me, meeting expectations kind of feels like below Comcast's actual expectations. But still, Epic hasn't even reached its final form. 6 months from opening, permits have already been filed for a massive show building, what people assume is going to be a 5th land, and or the second attraction in the Harry Potter land. And a headline that caught a lot of attention was a Comcast executive saying that Epic was, quote, not yet operating at its capacity. I'm not entirely sure what this means because it's not like anybody who wanted to buy a ticket to Epic couldn't. Like, they haven't capped ticket sales, so anyone that wanted to go could pay money and go right now. I assume they're mostly talking about park hopping, which is going to be added at the beginning of 2026. And while APs still can't get into Epic with their pass, the ability to park hop is going to change the vibe of this park dramatically. Currently, with the high single day price, there's this pressure to squeeze in as much park as possible to justify your ticket cost, and it really goes against the design of the park. There's so many areas that lend themselves to just casually hanging out. I imagine that more than any other theme park in Orlando, a day at Epic not riding any rides would be amazing. Not to mention, if you get rained out or there's insane ride downtime, you can just leave without that pressure of having to stay. Whatever the changes may be, I just hope that Epic can support all these new riders with its current capacity, or else you might park hop from IOA just to wait 6 hours for Ministry of Magic, which sounds horrible. I actually had a different ending for this video in mind and written and recorded and everything, but I'm just not as optimistic about Epic as I was 6 months ago. I still want to mention that the people that really made that opening day special weren't the Universal creative designers or the upper park management, but the face-to-face team members. Every single person I interacted with that day was so invested in being part of something special, whether it was the team member who helped us out with our ticket situation, all the people in Berk calling us Vikings, or just a chill dude who had a conversation with me as the gift shop was overwhelmed with guests. Getting that many people behind a singular vision is something you can only find in the art of themed entertainment, and that's the power of theme parks, really. Themed entertainment is one of the grandest displays of teamwork in all of the arts, and I think that's what everyone in Epic could feel in the air that day. So a big shout out to all the team members at Epic. But that being said, Epic is in kind of a weird spot because on one hand, it's open, but it's also not in its final form yet, and that's not going to happen for a while. It's frustrating for a guest in the know, but I imagine it's even more confusing for the average person. Is Epic open? Is it not? Why is there a ride that has continually like a 4-hour wait? Why is everything so expensive? Like, I think the average consumer is just sort of confused with the message that they're getting from Epic Universe. Like, I get wanting to curb demand through various means, like a high ticket price and kind of staving off those crowds while you build up your capacity and opening the park in stages. But I'm also worried that these roadblocks are harming Epic's image with the general public long term. And as I mentioned earlier, the TripAdvisor rating is very bad for Epic Universe. And I get that it's just a random website, but the truth is there are a lot of average guests who don't give a shit about theming and all this other stuff like I do, and they're leaving Epic dissatisfied. Among everything else, the price is just not justifying the experience right now. And even if you want to say that the price is just there in order to curb demand, it's not like Universal is going to lower this price. Like, typically whenever companies realize that people are willing to pay a certain amount for something, that cost never goes down. They're not going to undercut themselves when people are already willing to pay an inflated price. This is the price of Epic. Everything else may come with it, but I don't think you can ever expect to see a price cut in the cost of Epic tickets, no matter how many attractions get added. I also don't think Epic Universe caused Disney to implement any consumer-friendly changes, which I was really hoping for. And I get that it's going to take probably several years for this to happen, but I still expected more progress 6 months in. But that being said, I think you kind of have to look at Epic in a vacuum as one singular statement because it's too early to check all of the other surrounding context with Epic Universe because we're just not at that point yet. Whenever you look at the park under a microscope, Epic Universe is just that, epic. It conjures all these different emotional states, and its theming is on par with anywhere else in the world. The scale of what the park is capable of is frankly epic. But it remains to be seen if the ideal of epic can live in the real world, or if it's doomed to be snuffed out by the suffocating forces of economics, corporate greed, shifting consumer interests, and immovable market forces. Like I said at the beginning of this very long video, Epic represents a pivot for the future of themed entertainment in America. But will it deliver? Only time will tell.